Welcome everyone to the Town of Greater Napanee regular session of council for the 11th day of March 2025. Just before we get going here, I just want to remind everyone that this evening's meeting is going to be live streamed and placed on our YouTube channel. So the folks that have the ability to watch us tonight can watch us tonight, and the ones that don't, that want to watch us into the future, they're more than welcome to. All you got to do is just pull it up on our YouTube site and away we go. Just before we call the meeting to order, I'd just like to take care of a little business that's near and dear to my heart. On behalf of the Town of Greater Napanee, I would like to express our deepest condolences to the family of Dick Cherry, whom we lost late last week. To some of us, Dick was an accomplished hockey player, breaking into the NHL in 1956 with the Boston Bruins and later being drafted in the expansion draft by the Philadelphia Flyers, where he played 2 full seasons with the Flyers. In between that time, he won championships with the Kingston Frontenacs of the Eastern Professional Hockey League and the Oklahoma City Blazers of the Central Professional Hockey League. He later went on to play senior hockey in Kingston, as well as right here in Napanee with our very own Napanee Comets. Even after his competitive days were over, Dick continued to play the game he loved well into his 80s right here in Napanee. Yet to others, he was a teacher, a principal, an educator to many within this community and the surrounding area. His reputation within the educational system was profound, if not greater, than it was within the hockey world. His passion to teach was evident each and every time you had the occasion to speak to Dick. He had the uncanny ability to educate even when you thought you didn't want to learn. Dick was one of the most caring, compassionate, humble men I've ever known. When he would ask how your work was going or how you were feeling, he truly meant it. It wasn't just a conversation starter. He cared about his community and the people around him. Conversely, rarely did he talk of his own life experiences, and he had lots. It wasn't just not surprisingly, when you were able to get one of those stories out of him, it was always a good one. With all of his accomplishments, I think Dick's greatest passion was for his family. He was a devout husband, father, grandfather, brother, and uncle who was proud of his family and who they had become. To Steve, Christy, and your families, please accept our deepest condolences during this most difficult time. And rest assured, your dad was a profound difference in the your dad made a profound difference in the lives of many within this community and well beyond. So, Christy, Steve, he meant a lot to a lot of us in this municipality and a lot of other municipalities. So thank you for sharing them with us. Having said that, we'll call the meeting to order. I'll look for a motion to rise and report from closed session. Moved by Deputy Mayor Calver, seconded by Councillor Martin. If there's no further comments, questions, or concerns, all in favor of that motion? Opposed? Motion's carried. I would like to report that in closed session this evening, Council approved the closed session minutes of February 25th, received information regarding labor relations and gave direction to staff, and received information regarding negotiations to be carried on by the municipality. Having said that, we'll look for a motion for the adoption of the agenda as presented. Moved by Councillor Shank, seconded by Councillor Hicks. If there's no further comments, questions, or concerns, all in favor of that motion? Opposed? Motion's carried. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest in the general nature thereof? Seeing none. We'll start this evening's meeting off with a public meeting under the authority of the Planning Act. We'll look for a motion to convene a public meeting. Moved by Councillor Shank, seconded by Councillor Hicks. If there's no further comments, questions, or concerns, all in favor of that motion? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thanks, Michael. I see you're at the front. Just before we get started, is there anyone in the body of the council chambers that wishes to speak for or against the application that's going to be before us tonight at the public meeting? Seeing none, Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Worship. The public meeting this evening is fairly technical public meeting with regards to simply changing a zoning designation for 1919 South Shore Road from recreational commercial to shoreline residential. This property is occupied by a single detached dwelling with a garage And what the recreational commercial zoning was a legacy zoning from pre-amalgamation days. The land does not appear to have ever been used for resort commercial purposes. It's always been used for, to staff's understanding, for residential purposes. And the current owner is simply looking to change the zoning to allow them to best utilize the property for shoreline residential purposes, which is very consistent with the properties on either side of this property under consideration. And it is in line with the official plan designation of shoreline residential for this broad area. So staff plan to bring forward a recommendation at a meeting following this very shortly thereafter. And we don't foresee any concerns. We haven't received any concerns from the public as a result of circulating the application. It's very much a routine technical matter to clean up zoning that's been almost incorrect historically. There may have been an intent time ago for resort commercial use of that property, but it's always been used for residential purposes. And the current owner just looks to harmonize their zoning with those of their neighbors.
Thanks, Michael. Just before we ask if there's any questions, I guess I omitted from telling the folks at home that may not have an agenda sitting in front of them that the applicant with respect to this public meeting is Susan and Darcy Olayres. Legal description of the property is Concession 3, Part Lot 14 in the geographic Township of South Fredericksburgh, Town of Greater Napanee, and the proper street address is 1919 South Shore Road. Council, is there any questions for Michael with respect to this public meeting? Seeing none, we let you off easy tonight, Michael. If there's no questions or comments with respect to the application, we'll look for a motion to adjourn the public meeting. Moved by Councillor Shank, seconded by Councillor Hicks. If there's no further comments, questions, or concerns, all in favor of that motion? Opposed? Motion's carried. Next up on our agenda, we have presentations. The first presentation we have is with respect to the Ad-Hoc Trail Committee, and I know we have a couple of gentlemen here that are going to let us know how they've been making out with their committee. Welcome, welcome, Mark. Welcome. Isn't that off? Mike. As you can tell, I'm having a bit of a brain fart here. So, yeah, who's going to start, Mike? You or Mark?
I'll start, Your Worship.
Great, thanks. And I know that you've been here before, both of you, so that just a reminder that you have to push the button and hold the button down so that people at home can hear. If not, we get some nasty calls. So thanks. Go ahead, Mike, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Council, to have us tonight. We thought we'd come in tonight and sort of give an overview of the Ad Hoc Committee, some of the work we've done. It's been about a year and a half of get together, so we thought this is a good time. So I'm Mike Sewell, for those people who don't know me, and beside me is Mark Hamill, and he's also from the Ad Hoc Committee. I'm assuming this is the advance. And I've already pushed the wrong. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. You're right. It's really good that we got asked to do this in the sense that we represent a varied amount of background and ages and professions. And with that, we bring different things to the table, which I think has really been good for us. Rather than hear always the like-minded individuals talking, it's been really good for us to have that mix. We represent stakeholders, landowners, and in the stakeholders, they're active transportation supporters and just simply citizens. And so the mix was really good. Initially, once we first came together, our first thing that we had to do is we had to actually each hear each other's thoughts. And again, in any conversation, that's really important. We have to have the conversations, get them out on the table, find out where we're at and what we're looking for. And again, a lot of this came from that May 11th meeting back in 2023. So collectively, we've had quite a few walking meetings. We've had site visits. We've had robust discussions that did include town officials as per needed. We had conversation with previous administrations. And for myself, for example, I've had several conversations with several councils over several years. This is not a new issue by any means. It's just that we were asked to come together 2 years ago. And so collaboratively, what we're going to do tonight is we're going to present what we think is a series of options that we've been working on. And so I'm going to do some slides. Mark's going to do some slides. And hopefully we'll get to the bottom of the whole presentation without making too many mistakes with the microphone. So if we could go back to that meeting in time, probably some folks don't remember the exact wording or how it came about or what the mandate was. So I just put up here, just the ad hoc committee was formed to demonstrate a good faith effort will be made to find alternative trail routes leading to the Cataract Way Trail in Strathcona. And that was the crux of it. But from that conversation also came the secondary task of studying the feasibility of a connection that links the in-town portions of some of the existing former rail line and some of the potential trails that are in town and or could be in town. So for the sake of argument or discussion, it's out-of-town trails and in-town trails, and we'll define that a little closely, a little further as we go. Over the course of these conversations that have gone on for the little while, the conversation has also evolved. And I think in this 2 bullets here, I would say that this is one of the things that I felt was really good about this committee is that we came together as a group as an individuals, but we started to gel as a group in the sense that we started to understand that there's a bigger, wider conversations. So we started to look at even a wider vision of what active transportation could look like so that we can include more people, so that we could keep the core, the focus to be the downtown. Everything emanates from the downtown to the downtown. And that's really key to where we believe this trail really makes sense if it really focuses on how we move in and around the core. And we've also broadened this conversation, and again, we'll see that in just a moment, to start talking a little bit about what those users are, who they are. And it's not necessarily just those folks who are riding a bike. There's quite a few other users that we've tried to consider, and particularly when we start moving out of town, there's multiple users. So activities to date, I would say over the last year and a half, we've met at least 20 times. We've met in a bunch of different locations, some of them privately at the office at the hospital, or we've met in various other locations, town related. Again, because of our backgrounds, we come from different places, different times, but we have met quite a lot. We've also had several walking meetings. It would be very difficult to talk about trails or potential trails if we haven't actually been out and walked some of these routes. So there were quite a few times where the entire group, we got together, we met, we said we're going to designate an area and we'd go and meet on Derry Ave, or we'd meet over at the Riverside Cemetery, or we'd meet down by the boardwalk or the Riverine, and we would do these walks. And as we're going, we're looking around. So it was more than just sitting in a room. We actually got out and started to look at some of these places. We also ended up hiking some of these out-of-town locations. And in doing so, when we were doing the hydro line walkabouts, and Mark's going to allude to some of these in just a moment, we did meet landowners. Some were happy to see us. Some maybe not so happy to see us, but again, we were trying to be very mindful and respectful of where we went. Again, we were on foot and we were just simply exploring options that, again, you'll see in some of the mapping we've done and in some of the conversations. We have engaged some of the town staff. Again, some of the maps, for example, you'll see later on, they came from work that we have done with previous folks. And again, Mark will specify this, but these maps are just really just to give us a starting point, to give us an overview. Very difficult to talk about some of these locations if you don't actually have a map. We have on occasion met with some of the administration, with the Cataraqui Trail administration, and also the K&P Trail Association, to try to get their perspective and to find out how they make things work, what they do. And we've talked to them around logistics and setting up, and it's been really valuable for us. And again, this has helped expand our conversation, not only out of town, but what that might look like heading to town, in town, and the core area. And we've also met several times with the Minister of Transportation. And again, this is the interesting thing. We're a citizens group. And so for us, we've met with the ministry, but these are unofficial conversations. And I can say that I personally had 3 unofficial conversations with the ministry. And again, they've given me good information, but at the same time, it's the kind of information that's unofficial, simply because we don't really hold any position, so to speak, relative to the responsibility of making decisions. So they were good conversation, but they helped us really start to form some of our plans. And we have also in these conversations as well, of course, we've reported back, I think, twice now to the Recreation Committee, again, just to sort of give an overview and also to get some really valuable feedback from some of the members of the committee. And so the point of all of that is that we have done a lot of conversation with a lot of folks. We've got a vision here, and the vision is really to just try to tie existing trails in town to potential routes that could get us out of town and back, and in many cases, make these loops that are enjoyable to a wide range of users. And I think the user groups have changed a little bit in our mind. And again, that's through this conversation we've had with our group and the people that have come in and out of our group. We'd also like to improve some of the messaging about the benefits of this throughout the town. And hopefully from all of this, we'll establish a clear set of user guidelines, hopefully. And or maybe those guidelines might even extend to some of the folks who are thinking about building in Napanee and might consider this as part of their planning as they move forward and coming into Napanee. So we've tried to expand that conversation to include potential down the road. So to be clear, we have collaborated with a lot of different folks. We have engaged with the public. We've tried really hard to hear what they have to say. We have listened, and that listening continues to happen. We even today heard some really valuable information. So we hear, we listen, and we're not hiding from that. We want to be able to create a situation where we put to council several options. And I think that's what we're going to focus on tonight. There have been some obstacles. Not going to lie to you, there's obstacles out there. I think a lot of you know what they are. But some of the obstacles are really interesting in the sense that in any kind of a trail and a network, we have to deal with how do we cross the river? How do we cross the 401? How do we deal with the rail line itself and the bridge? And I'll come back to that. We also have busy thoroughfares such as Center Street. We have provincial planning and timelines that aren't necessarily ours. And again, it's very difficult to find out what those timelines are. And again, this is part of what we'll talk about at the end. And then we also have to talk a little bit briefly about just the unauthorized uses that are out there. And again, these are challenges. And this quote at the bottom is from Tom. And essentially, we need to wrap our head around these challenges. We've got to find ways to get around them because the trail is worth it. We have to find the ways around that. And so before I leave that, the rail and the bridge are an ongoing conversation that in our mind, you'll see that in those plans, we feel the best route forward right now for the source of the discussion is that we close that bridge. And we closed that bridge for a lot of reasons, but at the same time, there's safety concerns there. And also in conversations with the ministry, I don't think it's any surprise to anyone that the 401 is going to be widened. And in that conversation, and again, I can only say to you, the unofficial conversations I have with the ministry, 3 different officials, there is no long-term plan for that bridge. And so if there's no long-term plan for that bridge, the conversation changes dramatically about what we do after that. And so we feel that there is the conversation, though, with the ministry around how we will eventually cross the 401. We need to be part of that conversation. And so I think that's kind of where we've evolved. So Mark will likely, he will touch on that as we go forward. And so I'll leave it with Mark.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I'm just going to start by saying that the maps that we worked through were a lot of help from Diana, helped us get some of this mapping and some stuff done along the way. But the routes and different things that we've shown are not necessarily the actual path. We did try and stay more or less on just town-owned infrastructure because we felt it was necessary to not encroach on private citizens' land and say, listen, we'd like to go here, we'd like to go there. We thought that conversation was for a later date. So we said, we'll stick to town infrastructure, and then along the way, we can have conversations, talk about land use agreements and different things like that, that then we can get the trail moved into more collaborative state, like Mike discussed earlier, like the KMP Trail, Frontenac Trail. It's mixed use and has lots of different land use agreements and lots of parties involved to make that system work. So that's where we've approached this from a broad spectrum, I guess. So the main thing with this map is what Mike touched on earlier, is the crossings of the 401. So we've been through and through all the different ways in town, out of town, and we keep coming back to, if we can be in the conversation for when the 401 gets widened, to have pedestrian crossings at 41 Highway, County Road 1, Palace Road, and we've even touched on saying Beechwood Road might not be out of the realm either. If the town pushes more development that way, who knows? Eventually it might be a good idea to have a crossing that far. We just feel it's very important to be ahead of them on this, so we don't turn around and say, oh, I would have been really nice if we would have had something done here, here, and here. As for the one loop you can kind of see drawn in town, I'll touch on that later. But our idea is we start in town, and then we've kind of came to the conclusion that Springside Park is one of the focal points for our town. So if we can incorporate that from an in-town loop to Springside Park, and eventually maybe work that into a Palace Road out-of-town loop, like to funnel people right into the heart of our town. I mean, we've walked these areas numerous times, and we feel that that would be of great benefit as well, since we've discussed that a lot of different user groups seem to be advocating for more trail use. So we went through and said in-town trails are more pedestrian, bikes, things like that. But out-of-town trails, you could bring a lot of different user groups in, and then you could have staging areas where maybe someone comes so far into town, stops on whatever they're on, walks the rest of the way into town, and you'd kind of get the benefit of both worlds on this. So plan, did I go too far? No, sorry. So plan A are in-town trails. So basically, as you can see, the idea for the whole in-town loop is we start in the cemetery, we work our way, and that's on Dairy Avenue to come back in to hit the old rail line, to loop back up towards Church, past Church Street, and then loop back around back to the cemetery. So that's kind of our whole thought on an in-town loop. Now we've broken that down into different phases. So we as a group have thought that Plan A, Phase 1, would be something that we could start on more immediately. So since it involves the cemetery, there's a lot of infrastructure already there with trails that go through the cemetery. So there's some extra work to do to get a trailhead around County Road 1, and then to loop down through the cemetery, and then you cross at Church Street, Barrett, Queen, and back to Derry Avenue. And that's that's the first loop. It gets you to Derry Avenue, and it's mainly on roadways. There's some right-of-ways, there's a few other pieces in there, but we wanted to avoid going down that road because that is a town thing that the town can work on if they'd like. We just wanted to lay it out there that this was a route we thought would be a good starting point, and it's something that we feel like could happen relatively soon. So on top of Plan A, Phase 1, Phase 2 would involve then pulling up the rails within the in-town portion to complete that circle to get us that full loop in town. So then we would be tied together as one nice continuous loop. And it's obviously at Derry Avenue, Doghouse Studios, up the rail line, back towards the Red Tree Estates, and then hook back into the trailhead that we discussed in Phase 1 down by the cemetery. So our thought is Plan A, Phase 1, and Phase 2. They're more immediate plans. In saying that, there will also be constraints because nothing in this world is free, obviously. So there's going to be some challenges along the way, but we felt like Plan A, Phase 1 is the most low impact, probably low cost to begin with. And then while we work on planning for Phase 2, which may involve more resources, that could be something brought back to council at a later date and go from there. Our hope is that we can get the ball rolling and then pass that ball along and council can use the resources of staff and the managers they have the ins and outs of costs and what's available to them, and they can do the planning process with this. We'd like to be involved in it, but we kind of just like to get this ball rolling. So from Plan A, we move on to Plan B, Phase 1. So that is our more long-term focus, and that is getting safe passages across the 401 when it gets widened. That involves working with the MTO, working with the county, and trying to ensure that we have an understanding of where we think we would like to go so that that infrastructure can be put in place, even if we don't have a trail that gets built past that crossing for a long time. At least we have the crossing when the time comes, when it's available, when we can fund it, whatever we need to do. But that's kind of our approach. So Plan B, Phase 2 is, sorry, I'm on to. So working through a more multi-use trail that would take from the outskirts of Napanee and connect to Strathcona. So our hope is, and Mike alluded to it earlier, and we've discussed it with the other trail groups, the trails have more and more pressure to expand user groups that they currently have. They're under more pressure, obviously, because one is a funding issue and certain groups pay to use trails and it helps with maintenance and costs. So there's more pressure for things like snowmobiles, ATVs, horses, a few things like that. So that is our long-term approach, is we can work with those other trail networks. We can work with landowners. Once we have our crossings established and we have an in-town route kind of built, I think the external routes will seem so much clearer and it'll be easier to tie it all together as a whole. So there are some outstanding questions which we tried to answer. So coming down to some costs. So consultants. So if we need some consultant work done, obviously we were hoping the town would take the lead on that and the committee would support in any way we could. But I know that's obviously not our jurisdiction. We're just bringing a recommendation and we're kind of hoping that that could, the ball could get rolling with town resources. Which I touched on earlier. The project that we'd like to obviously put on priority is phase 1 of Plan A. We feel like it's the most, the easiest thing to get going in a short time frame. So staff time and use for these projects, there will be planning, implementation, and there will be maintenance costs regardless of what we do. So those are all things which council and town staff would have to be aware of, as well as they would be doing the work for that. And which we alluded to, the end users, when we started this group, the users of trails that we discussed, we had a lot narrower focus of what we really thought these trails might entail. And I think over the years, as we've talked to more people, we've talked to more user groups, we've talked to everyone, we've came to the conclusion that an expanded user group is going to be the future for all trails. It is coming, and we feel like we need to be adapted to that situation. So why start by already starting behind the 8 ball with a narrow focus instead of starting with an expanded focus on the multiple user groups that are going to want to use this, and set it up correctly from the start so that you hopefully can eliminate the back and forth of different user groups saying, well, what about us? What about us? What about us? Kind of thing. Turn it back over to Mike.
Okay, before we do that, one last comment about the should consultants required, the whole pay thing. Just as an example, because this conversation has gone on for quite some time, and it's no one's fault, it's just this is a conversation that's taken a long time to come to fruition. We've missed out on the possibility of some of the funding that Mark alluded to, in the sense that, for example, not really having an official project or support of obviously the town, it's difficult for us to identify the project to potential funders. And so a service group locally offered us money for this project, and we weren't able to move with that because, again, who are we? We're not necessarily approved by council at that time. So it's a very difficult thing. So the point being is that going forward, if there is the opportunity for grants, there's certainly more money available. I think first of all, if you are a multi-use facility, which we'd like to consider for out of town, but then also in terms of funding, just in terms of donations and us and our group, volunteer group, if we could really get behind a town-backed, town-supported project, we then have something that we can really deal with when we go looking for money from various groups. So anyway, so here's the asks, and I think you've probably already got a sense of that. Can we, the members of the Trail Committee or the Active Transportation Group that's in town, because we represent them too, and the landowners, we're wondering if there's a possibility, or we'd like to partner with the town for the initiation of a starting point. And so we'd like to partner with the town on that. Again, it's individuals, but we would look for the town to show some leadership on that so that we can get this thing. It's town land, it's town liability, so we recognize that. The role might become theirs to lead, or yours rather. In that, we ask the town then to seek the expertise and the equipment for the removal of the rails. We've been back and forth on the rails. We've had, again, unofficial conversations with people, and we've had quotes, but really at the end of the day, it's difficult for us to do that work without the support. So we need council support to help us with that. Of course, there's going to be some insurance coverages needed. And again, just in not only the users at the end of the day, but also for any volunteers that decide that they want to help. And again, we've had a considerable number of folks who've asked to volunteer. Again, this has gone on for a number of years, so we're still hoping we can capture that. And then also the conversations going forward with the MOT. Sure, I'd love to be at the table, and sure, many of our members would love to be at the table. We recognize that's probably not the official position of the town. We understand that. But as we said earlier, we really want to be in front of the conversation around how do we cross the 401. And we think we should be ready with at least 2, maybe even 3 options for where a safe pedestrian friendly crossing could be initiated. And if you've had a chance to cross the bridge from Waban, the Waban crossing in Kingston, that kind of comes to my mind, not in the length, but just in how they've dealt with pedestrians. It's kind of a good visual in your own mind of what a pedestrian-friendly crossing could look like. And then also, could the community groups then help support with fundraising and donations if there was an actual plan put forth? And we would certainly be willing to get in front of that volunteer piece. I think that's kind of where we've come from. And then the implementation, well, that's been tricky for us. To give you some history, and we've got some determined group folks in town, and we've tried a couple times to actually tackle some of this ourselves just through volunteer groups, and it was clearly without council approval. And again, I apologize for that. We have very ambitious folks, but at the same time, it really did speak to me in that there's people that really are willing. There's a lot of enthusiasm. And I think also this is not just a physical thing, it's an emotional thing. It gives something really positive for people to think about around community improvement and making themselves feel good about what this community means to them, and they want to demonstrate it. And so we believe there's a lot of that here in the town, and we think a project like this would really speak to continuous improvement. Right, and then lastly, sorry, I'm just, my glasses here a little. The budgeting process. Again, we understand in budgeting this project, there's going to be a certain amount of needed funds from the community, but also from the town. And we recognize that we can't just go ahead and do it ourselves. And we know that there's the rules of liability. And so the town is, with their direction, we're willing to jump in any way we can. And I'm really impressed with the people we have here. The solutions are probably closer at hand than we think. So the final thoughts, I've got lots of them, but I won't bore you with all of my personal thoughts. But what I wanted to say that is that trail networks are a critical piece of community infrastructure. They become far more than just use for recreation. There's a lot of reasons why communities have trails. And they're not just trails, they're active transportation routes. They're secondary access for relieving pressure on traffic patterns that are growing in and around the community. And I think we can see that, and there's a lot of really good reasons for that. And so I thought, just for the sake of the finality of this conversation, I just took some of this trail data from the KMP annual report. And just to give you a sense of the KMP trail, just the size of the use and the volume. So we're not anticipating we're going to have big volume right away, but at the same time, you got to start somewhere. And I think this is a great place if we can start in town, develop these trail networks in town. A lot of what we need to do will become much clearer, but at the same time, we have to get started on something. And that's what we're really asking the council, is with your permission to help us move forward with a project. We're willing to talk about it, change, we'll do with that, but we really would like to get started. But look at the numbers. In 22, the total number of users on the KMP trail is 207,000. That probably is surprising to people, the number of people that use that. This is the KMP side, not necessarily the Cataract Way. Those numbers weren't as easy to find. I was interested to see the unique number of visitors, and that's of importance as well. When you think about tourism in Napanee, the single biggest tourist destination in my mind in Napanee is the downtown and the waterfront. The more bodies that we can get in the different ways we can get them there is only to the advantage of this community. And you look at the unique visitors and the visitors that travel from over 100 kilometers. People are willing to come if you give them the way to get there. And it doesn't always have to be about parking. I think we can do it in other ways. And then lastly, to Mark's point, look at the different types of users. We recognize that. And so in town, we're thinking pedestrian only, but out of town, we think we have to modify that conversation. And again, there, I think, is our biggest asset is that we can widen the scope, more people, more entry level, more reasons to get involved. And we really need your help now, Mr. Mayor, just to sort of move this project from more conversation. And again, we certainly recognize, as Mark had already stated, there are a lot of costs and some of these challenges are real. But the sooner we put something together and move forward as a group, and I think that's what this group has demonstrated, that there is a willingness, for lack of a better conversation, the urban and rural, we have come together to solve this big problem, but it's also a benefit to the community. So thank you very much, Mayor. Mark, any thoughts?
Oh, I'm good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mark. Just hang tight. I'm sure we'll have a few questions for you, and then I'll make some comments at the end. Who wants to start? Go ahead, Councillor Pennell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Mike and Mark, thanks a lot for coming in here tonight. And speaking with us. If there's anybody sitting around this table who knows how long it takes to get something done, it's myself. My question to you would be about Plan B, getting across the 401. And I understand that your Plan A, is something that could be quickly done, if you will, loosely on the quickly. But when does the conversation need to start with the MTO on these Plan Bs? Because in your unofficial meetings that you've had with them, have they given you any indication of when that they'll be passing through here with the expanded lanes?
I could speak to that. Thank you, Dave. That's a good question. So in my conversations with one of the project managers of the MTO, these conversations have already begun. And so they've begun in the sense that they're going from Belleville to Kingston, talking about the widening of that corridor. And those conversations have started at the highest level. And that going forward, municipalities and understand public input as well is going to be invited into those conversations. And so aside from me hassling folks from the MTO weekly, I think these conversations have started to some extent. And what I have heard, and again, I can't say for sure, but the timeline is roughly 7 to 10 years out for the completion of said widening. And so now they're in that planning, gathering information, research phase. What do communities really need or want? And so this is where things get interesting, Dave, is that if the bridge is not part of the conversation in terms of long-term planning, which conversation then do we need to be involved in? So are we talking about widening the 401 and showing different crossings at Palace Road, County Road 1, 41 Highway, Beechwood Road? We need to get in front of those conversations. And the good news here is that my understanding of development in Napanee, that lines up actually pretty good with where we're thinking of developing. So the sooner we can get involved officially would be great. And I can't speak, Dave, specifically how that all works. They never want to give that to just me, but I'm sure those conversations could be answered.
Yeah, and I think Mr. Grant may be able to help us out with that. So go ahead. Mr.
Through
Grant.
you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Pennell. I'm pleased to say those conversations have already begun. Through Michael and his team, we have already registered official interest with the MTO about being able to go under or over or around the 401, both for purposes of recreation, but also utilities. And so they have registered that interest. They haven't necessarily come back with an answer, but we have it on file and we will continue to follow up.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Pennell. Thank you, Mr. Grant. Is there any other questions or comments for these gentlemen? Go ahead, Councillor Shank.
Well, first of all, I think the committee is definitely, I congratulate you guys for getting together. But what I'd like to do is make a motion that the council look at this and bring a report back all right? And what can be done with especially the short-term phase one plan A, so we can get that rolling, what is needed, what isn't needed, liability and all the questions that need to be asked, all right? I know from using machinery most of my life, there's certain things that we could possibly do, or can a private person, can I go in there with my excavator, on municipal land, can I help out, what can we do, what can't we do? And just have staff bring a report back, all right, to compensate what they've been doing to help them, and any questions that they have, they can get answered, and what the whole community can do also to get this going.
Yeah, and I'll be able to help you out with some wording there, Mike. Go ahead, Mr. Grant.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, just to add to that, so I've had the pleasure of sitting down with the group on a couple of occasions, and they've done some great work. I would say that the presentation this evening deviates a little bit from the original mandate, which was a supporting role of the town to more of a leading role of the town. So what I would suggest is in a report back to council that there be two phases. What does it look like if the town takes this on as a lead? Because this represents something that would alter current work plans for sure. And then what would it look like if it was the original ask in terms of a citizen-led initiative with staff support, and council can have an idea of what that would look like. I know that I did float the idea to the committee, but similar to others, there is the possibility of citizen groups forming NGOs, which makes it easier to insure and also raise money and the like. That could be an option if it's a citizen-led or continues to be a citizen-led project. And then in terms of that report, also indicating what work would we decide to set aside in the coming year or coming 2 years to accommodate this work, should that be the will of council.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. Go ahead, Councillor Pennell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Mike and Mark, also through your conversations with people and your fact-finding missions and such, have you had any concerns from anybody about driving more people through, inviting more people through to the cemetery, and what vandalism would be like? And the reason why I ask you this is that I have had a couple of phone calls since this was out the last time that we talked about this, and people are concerned because Napanee's been doing a really great job at cleaning up our cemeteries and doing such, and they're just concerned with, although anybody can walk through a cemetery at any time now, but it's just the increased, because now we're providing them with a more active, as you say, more active transportation way of going through there. So that's I'm just wondering what kind of feedback you've had of that.
Through your worship to Councillor Pennell, we haven't had anyone directly contact us that I'm aware of about risks throughout the cemetery. And just with talking to people kind of on a broad basis, our mindset was it's not going to happen overnight, but if you can make a trail that more people use, if you can have lighting on a trail, if you can attract more people to go through in a well-made trail, then we actually thought that might minimize those types of things, versus if you go to certain cemeteries now, you drive by and it's a dark hole in the middle of kind of the side of the road, where if you had a trail that maybe had a few light posts along the way to get you through the cemetery portion to get out, and you had more foot traffic, we actually thought as a group that might help with that situation. But we haven't had any direct, to my knowledge, concerns.
If I could add to that, there was a conversation online. I saw social media, and as it turns out, there was 2 people online that were concerned about that. I was really impressed, though, with the number of people who responded very positively, not in a negative way, but to the concern. And it mostly centered around, first of all, you're absolutely right, Councillor, is that the cemeteries are fantastic. They're turning around. They've done a great job locally. And I think what I got from some of that, of course, unofficial anecdotal conversation online was people really recognized the work that's being done by local town people and, town staff. As Mark said, more people, more eyes, more hearts. Hopefully it will diminish the times what perhaps we get the odd person, but I would hope to think that this would actually help us down the road. But certainly, we, as Mark said, we haven't had anyone directly contact us about this.
Yep, go ahead, Councilor.
Thank you for that. There was an excellent reply to that question. I really appreciate that because it's now made me look at it differently as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Pennell. Is there any other, go ahead, Councilor Hicks.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to acknowledge all the hard work that's been put into this over the last year and a half, and the maps. I love maps, so it was like blow it up and see where everything is. But just on the topic of the cemeteries, cemeteries are a very peaceful, calming place to be, at least for some people. And I think if you put more light and life, so to speak, into the cemetery, you remove the potential for vandalism. You remove the potential for darkness. And the same can be said for the downtown core of any city or town. The more light, laughter, liveliness, people you have in these areas, the less room there is for the other stuff, the darker stuff. And I think, as you said, Mike, having the focus be the downtown and the waterfront, one thing that Councillor Pennell and I do agree on is the potential for the waterfront, and it's not going to happen probably, dare I say, in my term of council, but eventually it will be expanded and more people will come in that way. And the number of boats, and you can attest to this too, on the Trent Severn where there's bicycles strapped to the back, that's, people dock their boats and they're riding all over the Kawarthas. And so the potential is huge, and I will support where and when I can on your endeavors for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Hicks. Deputy Mayor Cower, go ahead.
Thank you, through your worship. I want to thank you guys for the tremendous work you have done from the very start to where we are now. I know at the beginning it was a little bit rocky and a little bit rough, but your whole committee has just done a fantastic job coming together and putting this report together, and anything that I can do to help, I would be grateful to help you. So thank you for all the hard work you've done.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Calvert. Is there anything else before we look for a motion? Go ahead, Councilor Shank.
Now, is staff going to look at also one of the questions, one of the asks that the committee had asked was about the removal of the rail line. Now, are we looking into that, or when are we going to have an answer to that also, and how is that going to happen?
My best guess is that when we entertain a motion to note and receive and to ask staff to do some work on this, I'm guessing that at that point they're going to evaluate and assess all those types of matters. The only thing, and we'll get to it once we get there, but it is the thing that come up with the conversation this evening was the rail line that goes over top of or the bridge that goes over top of the 401. And it sounds to me like the folks that we've employed to look at this have probably had the most eyes on it. And they're suggesting that we, in some form or another, at least try and block that off. At this point, it doesn't appear to be any benefit to any of us at this point, and it may be a benefit to us if we try and block that off, just to restrict some of the usage of it. So, and I want to thank for the members of the committee for noticing that and bringing that to attention. But I also want to thank, and this should be of absolutely no surprise to any of us, that the work that this committee has done has been absolutely marvelous. You know, it doesn't surprise me because of the quality people that we have on this committee, but the work plan that you provided with us tonight with respect to plans and phases, your approach to getting this thing done is extremely reasonable. And I'm glad I've heard from other members of council how they support the work that you've done and want to see this come to fruition. So I'll echo the comments of Deputy Mayor Calver. Thank you folks for the work that you've done on this. And we've come from something that wasn't going to be possible to right at our fingertips at this point. So I think we've come a long way in the last year and a half or 2 years. So having said all that, go ahead, Mr. Grant, before we look for a motion.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I think what would be most helpful for staff is a motion from council indicating first a report specifically about the bridge. I think we can do that, that report relatively quickly and bring that back, that body of work. And a motion to bring back a report that would explore both what it would look like to have this project remain a citizen-led initiative, and then what would it look like if the town were to take this on. And then we can bring back what both of those bodies of work would look like and the expectations of the municipality in terms of cost and staff time.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. I think it's probably to our advantage, Madam Clerk, if we note and receive and then direct staff to work with the Ad Hoc Trails Committee to further define the direct and in-kind cost to the town of the proposed work plan to be presented to council for consideration, and then we'll do a separate motion with respect to bringing back a report with respect to the rail line or the bridge that goes over top of the 401 or
So through your worship, I believe it would be reasonable to include it all in one motion, that council directs staff to bring a report back regarding the bridge as soon as possible. And then further, the motion that you had read, I would maybe just add regarding Mr. Grant's comments, that the report would include what those costs would look like under both a town or citizen-led initiative. And then that be presented to council for consideration.
Okay, well, let's start with the bridge one because it seems to be fairly easy, and I think we can get an answer on it fairly quickly in the next meeting or two. So, Madam Clerk, if you could help us out with the wording on that one.
You do want two separate motions?
I think it'd be easier if we did just do two
Sure.
separate motions.
Did I think just what you said? Sorry, through your worship, then I think the motion would be council to note and receive the presentation and direct staff to bring back a report regarding the recommendation to close off that bridge as soon as possible.
Moved by Councillor Hicks, seconded by Councillor Shank. If there's no further comments, questions, or concerns, Councillor Martin, you had a comment?
Yeah. That motion is fine, but I'm just concerned, like, you're talking about the start of our plan is the loop in town. So that has nothing to do with the bridge going over the 401.
No, that's going to be the next motion, I think, Bill.
Okay, you're going to make another motion? I just want to make sure that we get started on plan
Yeah,
A.
we'll get this one out of the way and then we'll do a subsequent motion.
Okay, all right, excuse me.
Yeah. Is there any further comments, questions? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion that's on the floor? Opposed, motion is carried. Now, Madam Clerk, with respect to the next motion, it should, with Plan A, Phase 1 and all that kind of stuff, I know you've got something much more eloquent than I can say.
Through your worship, I think the next motion would be council to direct staff to work with the Trails Committee to further define both the direct and in-kind costs to the town of all of the elements of the proposed work plan under both a town or a citizen-led initiative to be presented to council for consideration.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, and I'm guessing, Mr. Grant, that will get you to where you need to be with respect to the matter. Moved by Councillor Shank, seconded by Councillor Hicks. Is there any further comments, questions, or concerns with respect to that motion? Councillor Hicks.
Thank you, Your Worship. One question, should we define that it's actually Plan A, Phase 1 and 2? Just to be very specific, I would propose that friendly amendment.
I'll look to Madam Clerk, but I don't disagree with you, Councillor Hicks. I think Plan A, Phase 1 and Phase 2 is extremely feasible and attainable. Plan B is going to be something further down the road that it's not necessarily dependent on the success of Plan A. However, it sort of kind of is, right? So if we could add that into the motion, Madam Clerk, I think it may be beneficial.
Through your worship, if that is the will of council, that's useful direction for us to have right now. So no concerns with that change.
If I may.
Go ahead,
so-
Councillor Hicks.
Just a bit. I think if we're specific about our plans and our phases, you can be working in parallel, perhaps, on Plan B. And you can say, we have the endorsement of council on this, which maybe will make the next phase in your conversations with others as a committee, a little bit more, it'll make it more tangible for people, I think. Anyway, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Hicks. And just so that we're all aware of what the motion is that's on the floor, Madam Clerk, if you could just remind us, and we do have a mover and a seconder.
Through your worship, the motion is the council directs staff to work with the Trails Committee to define the direct and in-kind costs to the town of Plan A, Phase 1 and 2 of the proposed work plan under both a town or citizen-led initiative to be presented to council for consideration.
Okay, is there any other comments, questions, or concerns with respect to that motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All in favor of the motion? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you, gentlemen. I'm just so impressed with the work that you've done and the amount of miles that we've covered and really in the municipal world a short period of time. I know in some other worlds it doesn't seem like it, but in the municipal world we've covered it in a short period of time. So thank you and continue the good work. So next up we do have a second presentation via transportation microtransit and Mr. Duame, sorry if Emerson, I'm sorry if I messed that up, but we'll get you to come forward here. And I don't believe you've been here before, but we'll give you the sort of the terms of engagement here is that when you're doing your presentation, you're talking, you have to push the talk button and hold it as you're talking, because if you don't, then the folks at home don't have the ability to hear you.
How's that?
So, yep, thank you, sir. And just for the record, we'll get you to give your name to Madam Clerk. I think she's probably got it, but. And your name, sir?
My name's Emerson Judene.
Great, thank you. And just before we get started, I think Mr. Grant would like to do a bit of a preamble, and that'll give you an opportunity to bring your presentation up on the screen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to members of council, you will recall that in previous conversations with respect to Deserano Transit, it was the will of council to assess and learn about other options that would be available for transit within the boundaries of Greater Napanee. With that, Mr. Emerson Dudene from Via Transportation Incorporated has been kind enough to come and give us an overview of what microtransit is, what it looks like, what it could look like in the town of Greater Napanee. Specifically, what I asked Emerson to do for us today is just to give us an introductory overview of what microtransit is and the possibilities. Should council wish to explore this further, my recommendation would be to come back with different options that would be available to us based on the experiences of other municipalities. It would be at a secondary point that we could say, you know, based on what you were looking for, this is sort of ballpark what you might be looking to make as an investment. And I would say that a transit system of this kind, what it would look like in terms of cost would specifically relate to what the goals are and the level of service that you would be looking to provide. And with that, I will turn things over to Emerson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. Emerson, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So first of all, I want to thank all of you for letting me come here today. This is my first time in Greater Napanee, and it's a really nice community. You know, I've had the fortune of speaking to some of you in the past at various sort of municipal events, and I think this is a really positive sort of discourse. So I want to thank you all for your time here. I'm just going to quickly jump to the first. Is this clicker here working?
Yep, you should have control of it there.
Perfect. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much. So, you know, before we jump directly into sort of the meat and potatoes of the conversation, I want to take a second just to take a step back and think about transit as a concept. I recognize that, you know, for some of you, transit might be something new. I know you might have some differing experiences with transit. And I want to sort of emphasize the fact that as you're looking at this sort of possibility in Greater Napanee, I want to kind of preface that, transit can be seen as, I want to frame it as a catalyst for change, for positive impact in your community. And so, I put this slide in front of you here, and I think it does a really good job of framing some of the benefits that transit generally, before we jump into microtransit, can have for a community like yours. I know, as I've had the benefit of speaking to some of you at the Roma conference, for example, transit can act as a pretty powerful conduit or a tool to support some of the initiatives that you are all working on very hard on a day-to-day basis here in Greater Napanee. And so when I look to this, studies indicate that for every dollar you spend in transit, if done correctly, can generate almost $5 in economic returns. And what does that look like? I think of sort of the ability to, as we're all sort of tackling challenges around the cost of housing, for example, or the cost of living today. Transit provides a really an affordable alternative for people to get to and from work, to get to and from local businesses. For tourism, I know Mike and Mark just presented about the benefits of providing people more access into the community, right? And so transit is here to support as a concept. It's meant to be a tool to kind of support some of the initiatives that you're working on here today. And I'm hoping that today I'll be able to show you an example of what that could look like that's a little bit different than what some of you might be used to when we think about public transportation in a community like yours. Perfect. So, I know many of you might be wondering, oh, sorry, I went too fast here. Perfect. So microtransit, the way that I like to frame it to people is, when we think about the options that people have from a mobility perspective in a community, on one side of the spectrum, you have, the traditional public transit, which is a fixed route bus, which can, be a very powerful tool at getting people around at a very cost-effective way. And on the flip side, you might have sort of private vehicle ownership, taxis, ride shares, which are very, very convenient ways to get around, but sometimes can be cost prohibitive for the average person, right? The cost of owning a vehicle can be quite high as a financial burden. So microtransit helps kind of fill the gap in between, and it can be kind of dialed in any which direction between the two of those options. So what that looks like is, through the use of an app, through the use of a phone, or even a website, basically, riders are able to book requests for rides, and through a fleet that would be kind of driving at all times during the service hours, they would come and pick up those riders, and in that vehicle, they would share a trip with other people that are going in the same direction as they are, without sort of fixing the notion of a fixed route like you might see with a fixed bus. And so these vehicles are kind of constantly being dynamically rerouted in a way that helps kind of move people in the direction that they're looking to do, but also, retains the aggregation and the pooling that we like to see in public transit, and ultimately provides a more cost-effective, both to the user or the citizens of Greater Napanee, but also to potentially to taxpayers in the city, a more sort of efficient and cost-effective way for people to get around the community. The goal is also to sort of, minimize the amount of detours, but also get people in the right direction without kind of creating too much disruption. So it's sort of meant to sort of fit the in between of public transit and fixed route while giving people some flexibility in terms of how to get to work, to healthcare, to school. So in front of you here, if you look at the slide that I have in front of you, this is the example of a community called Wilson in North Carolina. So Wilson historically had a traditional fixed route service, and by replacing that fixed route service with a microtransit service, where, for example, we might, rather than focusing on the core here, so if you look in the screen here, the fixed routes, we'll focus on the key kind of arteries of the community. Through microtransit and having these vehicles be more dynamically routed and more flexible in the way that they navigate the community, we're actually able to provide much better coverage to the community for a similar cost. And so what that result looks like for a community like Wilson, and again, this is an example of microtransit, and every single deployment of microtransit is a little bit different from one to the next, again, depending on the service levels and some of your objectives. But in the case of Wilson, Carolina, basically by shifting from the historical approach to transit to something a little bit more innovative, with a similar budget, they were effectively able to triple ridership and meaningfully improve transit coverage. So if I go back to that previous slide, you'll notice that there are some parts of the city that were not covered at all through the fixed routes. And by shifting into this microtransit model, they're able to provide more access. And so as you know, we think about Wilson, for example, they had a industrial park where there was lots of employers, lots of jobs, and they weren't able to kind of correctly and adequately provide fixed route coverage to those areas. And similarly, there were other neighborhoods that, for example, were on a lower income basis, didn't have good access to affordable options to get around. And so by shifting models here, they were effectively able to take the same dollars that they were using previously and emancipate or magnify the impact that they were having to the community. So how do municipalities use on-demand microtransit? So you'll see here in this slide that these are some photos from our service that we run in Kenora, Ontario, which is quite similar in size to Greater Napanee. But communities are using these services to improve access to jobs, to healthcare, and to other kind of community locations. So I think about the new health house initiative that you guys might have. Transit can really help get people to and from those appointments, or conversely, get healthcare workers to and from potential patients, right? So, similarly, we can think of microtransit as a more cost-effective, flexible, and scalable way to introduce public transportation in a community like yours. And so it really helps introduce the idea, test out the waters and get a better understanding of where people are trying to move around within the community, or as it might pertain, depending on your goals, outside of the community to other adjacent, economic hubs, for example. And ultimately, provide just better connectivity to community. So as I think about, people who might have challenges from a mobility perspective, as we think about supporting seniors, as we think about even, making sure that the services that we provide are a little bit more equal between sort of the urban core and the rural core, the rural component of the municipality, microtransit does a really good job of sort of tackling a lot of these different things in a slightly more approachable and palatable way that isn't going to necessarily, cause a ton of headache, a lot of operational challenges, and ultimately in a more cost-effective way. So when I go back to that very first slide that I'd shown, demonstrating the economic impact that microtransit might have on a community, this is sort of how I like to think about it. And so the idea here is, as we think about the way that we deploy microtransit services, the goal is to improve access to local retail and dining, provide better transportation to local jobs, create jobs locally, of course, because these services are staffed locally. And there are also great opportunities to promote sort of, local initiatives, local businesses. And this is, I think, a really good, visualization of how that sort of 1-to-5 ratio works in practice. Moreover, microtransit is something that is gaining a lot of adoption. So I recognize that some of you might be hearing about this for the first time, but this is certainly not the first tackle or go at something to this scale. So just in front of you here, for demonstrative purposes, is a quick snapshot of all the partners that we at VIA have globally. And when you look at this slide, you've got communities that range in all kinds of sizes that are looking to accomplish all kinds of different things. So, these are services that work for communities as big as the City of London, the cities of Calgary, but also very small communities that are just like yours. And so the idea is to try to set this up in a way to kind of tackle your local objectives, whether it's, getting seniors into the local Wendy's so that they can meet with the other community members, whether it's, getting people in the rural parts of the municipality into access to the more urban core. These have been, tried and tested. This is certainly not something that is unproven globally. And just to hammer that point home a little bit in a more kind of local context, I thought I'd show you as an example some of the partners that are already doing something like this with us in Ontario. So, you think of communities that are similar in size from a population perspective. We think of Kenora, where they replaced a underperforming fixed route service to provide better access to the new hospital that they're building, to provide better services to the Indigenous community that they have, or even the County of Brant, which is, a service that covers, over 1,000 kilometers of square kilometers of area with multiple communities that are spread out through a rural zone. Through that service, we're able to provide access to dialysis appointments for people to go to local distribution centers for jobs and for students to get access to their programs. And so each and every single one of these services is a little bit different from the one to the next. And the nice thing about microtransit, if you go back to that idea of the scale between fixed route and personal vehicle ownership that I kind of outlined to you earlier, is how you deploy that service can be really dialed in any one of those directions. And the goal is to try to make it work based on some of the objectives that you might have at the municipal level as best as possible. So again, I thought I'd show a couple of examples of how it's been deployed and more importantly, the impact that it's had to some of these communities. And so, our services in the case of microtransit, it's been tremendously impactful. For example, in Durham Region, where you have urban, suburban cores, but also a very large rural landmass. And by introducing the concept of microtransit and coupling it with their accessible service, the Durham Region Transit has been able to serve far more trips, far more use cases with effectively a similar sized fleet, which is pretty powerful in that regard. I mentioned Kenora again. I know that Greater Napanee has kind of dabbled in the fixed route services. If deployed correctly, I think can really outsize the initial impact that fixed route can have. So Kenora actually switched entirely from a fixed route service to an entirely microtransit service, and it's had a really, really positive impact on the community there. And as I mentioned, with Brant County, what we've noticed by reintroducing microtransit and restructuring that original service is we've been able to provide regional transportation both to the County of Brant and to Brantford and in and out of that urban core, and we've been able to serve a lot more of the local needs as sort of demonstrated here with some of the stats that you see in front of you. And so with that, that's really it. I just wanted to quickly highlight how the service works, explain some of the impacts that it's had, but I'm happy to take any questions that any of you might have at this point.
Great, thanks, Emerson. Is there any questions or comments for Emerson? Go ahead, Councillor Hicks.
Thank you, through your worship. Hi, Emerson. Thanks for coming. This is definitely a hot topic around some kitchen tables in Greater Napanee. So you've already answered a couple of my questions regarding Canadian operations. How does it work? Do you supply the vehicle and hire? So if I apply for a job, you say, here's van 001 or car, and this is the area that you will cover for pickups. So you actually have employees. Are there benefits? The reason I'm asking, jobs are hard to come by.
Right.
And so if you're going to employ local people, and yeah, I just have questions about, it's not a private vehicle that you've contracted, you actually own the system, right? VIA owns the system, owns the vehicle, and pays the wage.
So the answer to your question, and I'm not saying this to dodge your question, the answer is actually really it depends. And so all of those different examples that you saw on the slide, they're all kind of structured a little bit differently. The goal is not so much to force one sort of prescriptive answer. It's actually more so to adapt to the local kind of criteria or conditions of a partner. And so, if I look at Durham Region Transit, for example, this is a transit agency effectively. They have their own fleet. They have, their own drivers. And so really what we do is we help provide the technology to kind of deploy the service. In the case of Kenora and Brant, for example, it's a fully contracted out service because quite frankly, these are smaller communities. They don't have the same level of resources. And so we recognize that, that it might be a much bigger ask for them to kind of get a service going from scratch. And so in the instance of a service like Brant County or Kenora, for example, someone like us, and I'll speak to the way that we tackle microtransit. It's a fully contracted out service. And so we will take care of the recruitment of the drivers. We will provide the fleet for the partner. We'll manage all of the training, and we'll provide, more importantly, which is the crux of this is really the technology that helps actually run the service. So again, without giving too much away and getting too deep into the weeds, we try our best to act as extensions of our municipal partners and helping them, navigate what it looks like to kind of introduce public transit. So I don't know if that answers your question. When it comes to the actual fleet, I recognize that, ownership of fleet can be prohibitively expensive. There's some capital budget. Yeah, agreed. No, and I'm actually quite glad that you brought this up. So, ownership of a fleet has some pretty onerous capital budget implications. And so generally what we try to do is we work around what our partners' objectives are. So in some cases, our partners actually want to own the fleet, but maybe they don't want to manage sort of the recruitment of the drivers. And so we'll actually step in and kind of fill the gap based on what they have. In other instances, what we like to do is, as a turnkey service, there's no purchasing of vehicles. And so actually, Jessica, if I can pull up my deck again really quickly, or sorry, I'm not sure if that's, you go to the appendix. I don't know why I didn't bring this up earlier. It's actually, it outlines it quite well here. So I'll use the clicker here. Yeah, do you mind going to the next slide here? Next one. Oh, strange. Bear with me. Councillor Hicks. Next one. Okay, perfect. So, again, each and every single one of these deployments are a little bit different in how they're set up and how they work. I'll skip ahead to this slide here. But one of the things that we do is these turnkey operations. And so in theory, it kind of allows communities to test the waters out for public transit and without sort of making that like massive upfront investment. And the idea is everything is kind of handled in-house through like an operating budget. And then, because the goal of the service is we want to work with our partners to try to like adapt to their needs and their resources as much as possible. Nothing is irreversible. And so if you decide, a lot of our partners decide to start off as a turnkey partner just so that they can kind of get their feet wet. There's no firm commitment. You don't have to make a massive capital investment. If you want to start it off for a year as a pilot project, for example, you can do that without necessarily being on the hook with like a huge fleet, for example, with massive infrastructure investments. And then, sometimes some of our partners after the first year decide that, they've realized that, there's a core fleet of 3 vehicles that's absolutely necessary. And then they've added in 4 or 5 vehicles as, supply and demand has gone up. Maybe there's tourism on a seasonal basis, or maybe there's students. You can turnkey out those other vehicles, and it gives you kind of the ability to kind of like flex up and down on multiple of these different components. Does that answer your question, Councillor Hicks?
It does. And if I may follow up with a question to Madam Clerk, this type of model, because we're talking about something similar, and I'm going to use the U and the L, Uber and Lyft, they fall under the taxi license bylaw. So there's vulnerable sector check that regardless of who provides the driver, all of those things are done. It falls under all of the constraints of the taxi bylaw.
Through Mayor Richardson. Yes, Councillor Hicks, our taxi bylaw currently would cover this because it is a third party providing transportation to a member of the public. if we were to go down this road, we may want to take another look at the taxi bylaw and see if any additional changes needed to be made, either to strengthen or loosen any of the current provisions to best support this type of a model. But as it currently stands, it would fall under that bylaw.
Yep, go ahead, Ange.
And now I have the question that the public probably wants to ask, if I may. So I've downloaded the app. I live outside of Napanee. Let's say I live 5 kilometers out on a rural road. I call, I book the appointment. I say I want to be picked up at 10 o'clock. I have an appointment at 10:45. That's ample time for me to get from point A to point B at the hospital. In the meantime, somebody next door and 3 kilometers away and somebody that's half a kilometer away but a little bit more south, so those 3 people have all booked a time at 10:10, 10:15, and 10:30. Am I going to be late for my appointment? That's my question. And can I pre-book the time that I want to be picked up, allowing for delays at the appointment? Am I going to be left waiting? Because you see where I'm going with this, because I read some reviews. I'm just saying, I've looked you up and I'm sorry, I'm
I would
asking
hope
some
so.
questions.
Yeah.
So yeah, how does that work? And because I'm not going to be happy if I miss my appointment because I'm 15 minutes late because your driver thought, yeah, I can squeeze one more body in the back seat. Okay, please proceed.
Yeah. No, so these are great questions. And I think they kind of come down to sort of the preamble that Mr. Grant kind of flagged at the beginning, right? So the way that the service is set up, every single one of these services is parametered a little bit differently. So, when it comes to sort of these like spontaneous requests that kind of pop into the system, like the whole point of having the technologies is it tries its best to kind of manage the requests and the supply and the demand as best as possible. Now there are, as these requests come in, there is potentially the risk of, the service being undersupplied. Now it is generally when we work with our partners, we try our best to sort of work within the constraints of their financial resources, working within the constraints of their objectives. And, there are hundreds of different parameters that we can adjust up or down to kind of help manage the different kind of what's the word that I'm looking for? The different kind of like dynamics that are at play locally within a certain service. So if you think about, I'll use the example of the brand service that we launched. When we first launched that service, we found that met demand was in the 90s, which is great. That's generally a good sign. It means for every 100 requests that someone puts in, 90% of those requests are met with a proposal that is deemed acceptable by the municipality. But over time, as we learn more and more about the partners, and this is one of the nice things about Microtransit, is we're kind of constantly always tweaking the service to try to squeeze more supply, try to make changes to the service, and so. As we learn more and as we recognize that, seasonality comes into play, maybe you have different sort of population patterns that kind of move and new developments, we're always trying to monitor the service to make sure that the service is kind of meeting your objectives as best as possible. And so, we have levers, and some of those are, things that we can change on the technology side. In other instances, it's, increasing supply of the service through, maybe adding another vehicle, right? But we're always going to try our best to work within sort of the resources that are allocated to us by the, local service. This isn't meant to be sort of a private ride. This is meant to be a shared service. And with that, there are parameters that you need to navigate as best as possible. But we always try our best to make sure that we're meeting the supply and demand dynamics of the local partnership.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor. Go ahead, Councilor Pennell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Emerson, thanks a lot for coming in and talking to us tonight. I see that on your website, you have all these different ways to pay. So my question to you is, without even getting into costs or whatever, but that's, if you went with a full contracted services, is there a cost to the municipality, or is it all user-based?
Yeah, so the great question. So generally, much like public transit, the service, the cost of the service is offset by ridership, but ultimately, our contract remains with the municipality. This is meant to be a service, much like any other service that you might provide at the municipal level. And our goal is to try to offset that cost as much as possible, but certainly it's not going to be a one-to-one ratio. And quite frankly, in the world of public transit, there is, I think, less than 5 agencies around the world where service revenue outweighs the cost of that service, and those are agencies that have access to real estate income and things like that aren't sort of available to the average service. So yes, the service would cost likely more than the ridership, but we try our best to work within the parameters and your goals to set that up for success. And success is really contingent on what it is that the community is looking to accomplish. Does that answer your question, Councillor Purnell?
It does. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Purnell. Is there any other questions or comments for Emerson? Go ahead, Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for coming in tonight, but what's the least populated area that you've had the service work with? Like, we have a roughly 18,000 urban and rural. I'm just curious, what's the least population you've dealt with before?
Yeah, great question. So I actually this is part of the reason why I brought up Kenora and Brant, and even Durham Region to an extent, because in some of the more rural zones, the density level is similar, very similar to Greater Napanee. So Kenora, for example, is a community of about 15,000 people. It's a 15, yeah. And we're actually launching another service that in Newfoundland, Labrador, which will be a little under half of that. So the nice thing about microtransit is it's pretty scalable. You can kind of tiptoe your way into it, and the alternative of not doing something at all or even providing a fixed route can be a huge ask for a community of your size, and microtransit helps kind of bridge that gap or kind of get in that sort of in between. So the way that we set these services up, depending on what type of zone that you're trying to cover, is it just within Greater Napanee? Is it to connect people into even more urban centers like Kingston or Belleville or Prince Edward County, as an example? These are all things that have an implication on the cost and what that looks like. But ultimately, we work with fairly low density and smaller communities all the time. It's actually quite common, and if anything, probably one of the easier use cases for us to do something like this.
Thank you for that.
Thanks, Councillor Martin. Is there any other? Go ahead, Councillor Hicks.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. So I pulled up Kenora and I'm looking at it, $250 per one-way ride. That's pretty reasonable. I could see me using that when my Maserati gives up the ghost. However, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Are those like hard and fast rules? Okay, because if you've got a large manufacturing facility that's running like continental shift, they start at 7, so they need to be there for 6. Like, do you do 24/7? Do you do weekends? Or this was just the decision of that municipality? Okay.
That's exactly right. So, and again, I'm really glad you're bringing up great questions, because these are things that I think are important to clarify. So every single service that we set up is sort of the output of a lot of careful consideration and planning before launching these services. We're not just sort of here to kind of like turn on an app and call it a day. So prior to setting up these services, generally what we'll do is we'll work with our partners to understand what their objectives are at the municipal level, even outside of like transit, for example. What are their financial resources? Like, what are their priorities as a community? And we work backwards in that regard. And so, for example, some of our services are actually meant to fill that overnight gap for other communities that might have fixed route. In other instances, where, for example, in an overnight context, we work with lots of universities, for example, where they want to give students a safe passage home late at night when they're going out from the bars, or maybe even coming home from the library. That's actually our service that we provide to Western University. So it really comes down to like what it is that you're looking to accomplish, what your financial resources are. In the case of Kenora, for example, they already had a pre-existing service, and so for them, it was important to maintain sort of the fare policy that they previously had, and maybe make it more impactful. And so they felt that it was best to kind of maintain that. But in the case of Brant, for example, these are longer distances that are being traveled. And so they decided to go in a completely different direction. So it will, prior to launching any service, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out like what it is exactly that you care about. What can you do today? And we'll, every decision has an effect on a service, whether it's the fare. You don't want the fare to be too high because ultimately that will prevent people from using the service. But on the flip side, you don't want it to be too low because you're trying to recover some of the costs that you have. And so all of these different things, these are, it takes a few months to launch a service like that. And these are all things that we sort of like work through to try to find, again, microtransit is really, it's an exercise of balance and finding the right like sweet spot. And as your community changes and grows, you want to adapt that sweet spot as that change happens so that you're kind of always hitting the milestones that you want to hit and the targets that you have in mind.
Thanks, Councillor Hicks. Is there anything else for Emerson while we've got him here? Seeing none, just briefly, Emerson, the system you described is sort of an on-call system, but does your organization or group have the ability to provide a sort of a fixed route type of thing as well? I mean, I'm guessing that it's not just one thing. You can provide just about anything we want that we think is going to be required to provide the municipality with transportation. Am I correct there?
Yeah. So the answer is yes. Like I said, I showed Kenora and Brant because I think they're more relevant potential examples to what Greater Napanee might start with. But certainly, we actually run and operate full transit agencies all over the world where there are components of fixed route. The goal is, as microtransit ridership grows, as you get more ridership, there's a pivoting point where it actually becomes better for the community to introduce fixed route. And we always try our best to kind of like flag that point proactively. And when that change becomes required, then we can certainly look at that depending on what it is that you're looking to do. So yes, the answer is yes. And it's kind of on a case by case basis on whether or not that makes sense.
Okay, and just secondly, I mean, we're talking about the town of Greater Napanee, and if there's monies that have to be funded, it would be funded from the town of Greater Napanee. But say somebody calls from Deserano, how does that work? Or is there an opportunity for this system to be expanded to an area as opposed to just the municipality of the town of Greater Napanee?
Yeah, these are again, it goes back to sort of the point that I was making earlier about the service design, right? It's who's involved, what are the partners? Sometimes some of our services actually involve multiple partners, multiple neighboring communities. And so, to your point, it's quite common for these services to grow, for sort of adjacent municipalities to kind of opt in and participate, because as they see the benefit, they want their kind of citizens to participate in that. So, in that sort of service design process, depending on, the levels of service that you're looking at, the sort of supply and your goals, we can make the service available to people from Deseronto, for example, if like, let's say that's part of your priorities and you want to maybe get people from, I don't know, I'll use an anecdotal example, but like the city of Belleville to come in for tourism, for example, into Greater Napanee, like that's certainly something that we can accommodate. And again, it's about finding that balance of what does that do to the overall supply and demand of vehicles, and what are the implications of that. So in Brant County, for example, Brant, for those of you that are maybe less familiar with Brant County donuts around Brantford. But as you can imagine, Brant County is fairly rural in nature, but Brantford is a pretty large urban core. It's where a lot of the services are provided for the citizens. And so as part of the service design process, what we do is, anyone is able to take a ride within Brant County to another destination within Brant County. However, we also allow people to ride in from Brant County to Brantford, and similarly, anyone from Brantford to come into Brant County, but we will not allow trips within the city of Brantford using the service. So the idea is Brantford has a fixed route service. We expect people who are in Brantford to use that service, but ultimately, if we can facilitate movement into Brantford to, make sure that people have access to those core services, that we'll make sure that we do that. And similarly, if there are tourism aspects, the town of Paris is beautiful, for those of you that might not know it. And, there's a huge kind of tourism aspect there. And we want to make sure that we can facilitate mobility for people from Brantford into the County of Brant to visit some of these landmarks as needed. So again, these are all parts of the conversation from a service planning perspective, and depending on how you set this up, these are all definitely things that we can address.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Emerson. Is there anything, about my questions that anyone would like to ask Emerson before we look for a motion and move forward? Seeing none, we will look for a motion to note and receive. Is there any appetite to ask staff to look any further to see if there's, I mean, we do have a resolution on our books that we're going to investigate any and all types of transit for our municipality. And so, you know, I don't want to give you the opinion that you're the only one that we're looking at, but is there any appetite from council to delve a little deeper into this, just to see what costs might be, what routes may look like, whether or not we have any appetite for neighboring municipalities to want to join us in this venture or not. So we'll entertain a motion if there's one out there. Go ahead, Councillor Shank.
I just like seeing numbers. Then you can see the data. We know what the ridership was the last time. So all I'm saying is I like to see the numbers, what it costs, what it doesn't cost, what the potential, you know, it would be. All right. And then when we compile all the prospective people that are going to do it, then we can go ahead and look at the data, whether we want to, whether it's cost efficient or not. So yeah, I'll make that motion.
Thanks. Thank you, Councillor Shank. Mr. Grant, did you want to weigh in before we look for a seconder?
Sure, through you, Mr. Mayor. I think what might be a good next step, and I appreciate that council is looking for something that is data driven, is to come back with maybe different examples of systems or things that were already up and running. Here's an example of X. This is a ballpark of what that might cost. Here's an example of Y. Here's a ballpark of what that might cost. And so we get an example of systems that are already in operation, up and running, and what those costs are and what the ridership might be. And I think that if council is interested in learning more, might provide relevant examples of the system and the costs.
Thanks, Mr. Grant. Councillor Shank, you're going to make a motion to note and receive, and Madam Clerk will look for a little direction here, but to continue discussions with VIA to explore options that are available to us.
Through your worship, I think what I heard from Councillor Shank is that at this point, council is looking for a report back that includes at minimum some costing details of this proposal, as well as compared to what that might look like ballpark compared to other transit options. So I guess for a motion, sorry, that would be council direct staff to bring back a report with financial information on the transit proposal.
Oh, yes.
Moved by Councillor Shank, seconded by Councillor Martin. Is there any other further comments, questions, or concerns with respect to the motion that's on the floor or the discussion that we've heard this evening? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion that's on the floor? Opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you, Emerson.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's really nice meeting you.
It's really a sort of a neat and novel concept, one that obviously we haven't seen in this part of the world yet anyways, but it gives us something for us to think about with respect to transit within our municipality, and it's I think it really is the way of the future. So thank you for spending the time and coming to Napanee and explaining it to us.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you. I think at this point we're going to take about a 10-minute break. We'll take a 10-minute break. We've been at this for about an hour and a half, so we'll see you back in about 10 minutes. Thanks and welcome back, folks. Next up on our agenda, we have deputations, and we have a deputation from Tony Balasevicius with respect to the Arena Reserve Fund. Come on up, Tony. I know that you've been here before and you know the rules of engagement with respect to pushing the button so the folks at home can hear. And whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Your Honor. I just want to inform council, I had dental surgery yesterday afternoon to extract a tooth. So if some of my pronunciations are a little off, I hope you'll understand. Thanks. I would like to thank council for the opportunity to be here before you this evening. At its 11th February regular meeting, council was asked to reconsider previous resolutions on the funding for replacement flooring of the home hardware rink. This was done and it was decided that the total cost of the $70,000 project would be passed on to taxpayers as part of their 2025 tax assessment. That discussion prompted me to review the town's bylaws on reserves, more specifically the Arena Capital Reserve. After an examination of the document, I felt that it was necessary to come before you to highlight concerns I have with the current structure, governance, and funding model of that reserve. If you could put the slide on, please.
Yeah, just bear with us, folks. We're just trying to get some slides up on the screen so you can see it at home.
I would like to begin by drawing your attention to the details of the reserve on this slide before you. As you can see under policy, it states this reserve fund consolidated the previous arena and arena surcharge reserves. The intent of this reserve fund is to maintain a reserve fund to support the capital replacement and maintenance of the arena facility. I highlight this specific statement because the problem with putting capital replacement and maintenance into the same fund is that it attempts to merge two diametrically opposed objectives. One objective is attempting to put away money for a new facility where the priority is on savings. The other, which is for maintenance, emphasizes spending blocks of targeted money in order to prolong the lifespan or life expectancy of the building. The problem with this arrangement is that any time the arena requires a major capital replacement item, it is questioned against the need for savings. In fact, this very situation played out at the 11th February meeting leading up to the final vote. The debate for maintaining savings usually centers around the need to protect the reserve. Sometimes this is a very valid argument, and sometimes it is not. If we look at the bottom of the slide, we can see the recommended annual contribution to this reserve is $200,000 a year. Given the fact that this fund combines two functions, we can assume this is sufficient money to meet both of those requirements. Also, it is important for viewers to realize that this figure is aspirational. This is because it is a discretionary fund. So putting money aside each year must compete with a host of other priorities. In fact, prior to 2023, saving even small amounts of money for this fund's predecessor was at best difficult. For example, between 2021 and 2022, the former Arena Reserve Fund remained flat at $277,873, while the former Arena User Surcharge Fund went from about $670,000 in 2021 to $720,000 in 2022 for an increase of around $41,000 for that fiscal year. The slide shows a combined total within $37 of those two funds, which was at $997,678 as of the merging of these two funds and the implementation of the bylaw in October 2023. Yet, as we heard during the February 11th meeting, the reserve fund now sits at just over 1.2 million unaudited. That is a jump of 202,000 in just one fiscal year. So how did that happen? Specifically, at a time when the town's budgets are supposedly very tight, with little money to spare, how did we see a five-fold increase in cash moving into this fund? I do not have access to the town's audited financial statements after 2022. However, it likely got there because in April 2024, the town paid off the bank loan for the arena. Rather than returning the levy, which had been put on taxpayers for the arena's mortgage, the town decided to withhold the funds to, among other things, increase the arena's maintenance reserves. That decision had two significant impacts on the reserve. In fiscal year 2022, the mortgage levy was sitting at $549,672. And in May of 2024, the fund gained access to monies from the levy after the final mortgage payment was made. This was around $366,403 for fiscal year 2024, of which about $150,000 appears to have been actually put into the reserve. The other impact that the Arena Capital Reserve was, or the other impact that this had, was that the Arena Capital Reserve was transformed from a user to a taxpayer-funded reserve. After April 2024, the argument that common areas of the arena should be subject to taxpayer levies becomes problematic because taxpayers are now paying most of the reserve's annual contribution in the form of an established levy. Okay, slide off, please. If the town does not want to put the full $550,000 of the former arena levy towards the Arena Capital Fund, it has the authority not to do so. And it can be argued there are a host of other priorities that need to be considered by the town, especially during these difficult times. However, logic suggests that as a minimum, the town should be putting sufficient money into the reserve to cover likely draws without expecting additional taxpayer assistance. If the town is making a $150,000 contribution from an established $550,000 tax levy and still requires an additional $150,000 special levy on taxpayers, that is a problem. It means that the capital replacement and maintenance reserve for the arena facility is being underfunded at the expense of taxpayers, as they have already provided the town with more than enough money to cover the arena's expenses. Taxpayers are paying a special levy of $550,000 for a mortgage that has been paid in full for almost a year. In addition, they are paying part of their baseline tax assessment for the building's day-to-day maintenance. If they want to use the facility, they have to pay additional user fees. And if that is not enough, they are now being told that all those taxes and user fees they are currently paying to keep the doors open does not include the capital management program, which this year alone will cost taxpayers an extra $150,000 or about 1.3% increase in their taxes. All this comes in a fiscal year when the town also reached the recommended annual contribution of $200,000 for that account for the first time. So we know that the money was in the fund to cover the expenses. I am asking council to consider the following recommendations. Replace the Arena Capital Reserve Fund with separate capital arena replacement and maintenance capital reserves. Put sufficient money from the former arena levy payments into the arena maintenance capital reserve to cover expected capital maintenance requirements. And amend the bylaw to reflect the fact that this reserve is primarily funded by taxpayers' dollars. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Is there any questions for Tony with respect to his presentation or the information he's provided with us tonight? Go ahead, Councillor Hicks.
Through you, Your Worship. Thank you, Tony. Can you provide a copy of your summary to Jessica? Because I like to have it just so I can read through it at my leisure, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Councillor Hicks. Is there any other questions or comments for Tony? Seeing none, we're going to let you off the hook fairly easily tonight, Tony. Thanks for coming out. We appreciate. Always good to hear from you, and it's nice to see you. So,
Thank you very much. Have a
Great.
Good evening all.
thanks. Looking for a motion to note and receive the presentation of Tony Balasevicius with respect to the Arena Reserve Fund. Moved by Councillor Martin, seconded by Deputy Mayor Calver. If there's no further comments, questions, or concern, all in favor of that motion? Opposed? Motion's carried. Next up on the agenda, deputations items on the agenda, and I don't believe, Madam Clerk, we have any of those. Unfinished business, we haven't got any unfinished business this evening. The administrative consent agenda, and as usual, we'll go through this and we'll see if there's anything anybody wants to speak to. First up with the council minutes, regular session of council dated the 25th of February 2025 and the corrected minutes of February 11th, 2025. Is there anything in those minutes anyone would like to speak to or ask questions about? Seeing none. Committee minutes, Arts Advisory Committee and the Municipal Heritage Committee. Is there anything in those minutes that anyone would like to speak to or ask questions about? And I'll give an opportunity. I don't believe Councillor Norrie is here for the Arts Advisory Committee, but I know Councillor Martin is here. Is there anything you'd like to highlight, Bill, with respect to your committee there?
I'll let the report speak for itself, basically, but we did have a shortened meeting as well because if you recall, the Canada-US hockey game was on that night and we were anxious to get home. We did basically touch on the town hall renovations, and we did discuss something not on the agenda, which was artifact storage, which I expect we'll probably get more into in detail this coming meeting again. And we have another item we want to get into as well. I think I'll just let the minute speak for itself. And like I said, I'll have a more detailed report after the next meeting because the committee has to weigh in on a couple of things that I really don't want to get into tonight. I'll let them do that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thanks, Bill. If there's nothing else, next up on the agenda, we have correspondence for information items dated March 11, 2025. Is there anything in that correspondence anyone would like to pull out or have a conversation about? Seeing none. Proclamation request, World Autism Day. With respect to that request, is there anything anyone would like to speak to on that? Seeing none. Proclamation request, Be a Donor Month and Green Shirt Day. Is there anything with respect to that proclamation anyone would like to highlight or speak to? Seeing none. Land sale bylaw, listing and strategy update. We have a fairly extensive update there. Is there any questions for staff that they can answer with respect to the land bylaw, land sale bylaw, and the listing and strategy update? Seeing none. And finally, boards and advisory committees monthly report for March of 2025. Is there anything in those report that anyone would like to speak to? Go ahead, Councillor Pennell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to speak about the Market Square Advisory Committee. We've had our first meeting since October of last year. And I'd like to state that we elected a new chair, which is Les Humphreys, and a vice chair, Bob Mayhew. And very excited to continue to work on this building and the grounds around as well. So it's exciting to get back in the seats and have these meetings. Thanks.
Great, thanks, thanks, Councillor Pennell, and congratulations, Mr. Humphreys. You're still left in our council chambers, so congratulations on that. If there's nothing else, we'll look for a motion that council consent to the approval of the following routine items. The minutes of the regular session of council dated February 25th, 2025 be adopted as presented, and corrected minutes of February 11th, 2025 be received. That the draft Arts Advisory Committee and Municipal Heritage Committee minutes of February 10 through to 20th, 2025 be received for information. That the correspondence for information items dated March 11th, 2025 be received. That council proclaim April 2nd, 2025 as World Autism Day in the town of Greater Napanee. That the council receive for information and endorse Green Shirt be a donor month in the town of Greater Napanee. That council receive for information the land sale bylaw listing and strategy update report. And finally, that council receive for information the boards and advisory committee's monthly report for March of 2025. Moved by Councillor Hicks, seconded by Councillor Martin. If there's no further comments, questions, or concerns, all in favor of that motion? Opposed? Motion's carried. Items for consideration. First matter up is CR-01-2025 Arts Advisory Committee Recommendation Mandate Letter. And I see Mr. Brown coming forward. So Chris, the floor will be yours when you get settled.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'm just bringing this report forward as the Arts Advisory Committee reviewed their mandate letter at their February 10th meeting, and they recommended some changes to the wording in their mandate. So I'm just here to present those to you. Like I said, they're pretty minor in nature, and it just has to do with some of the wording. So the first one under the bolded section, subsection 2, change growing to promoting of product. And so just for context, that would read, recommending a list of amenities that would be desirable in the refurbished first floor of Town Hall that would support non-permanent artistic endeavors and events, including visual arts, live performances, crafting, production, promoting of product, etc. And to strike the word growing. The second one is under a bolded section 2, add the word and before encourage. And so that would now read, make recommendations to council on types of attractions and events the town of Greater Napanee should look at and encourage in town square based on the experience of other municipalities, and it goes on. The third change under bolded section 3, adjust the wording of point 3 to say showcasing local artists of all disciplines and take out the word intermittently before accessible. So just striking the word intermittently entirely. The fourth change under bolded section 4, change overseen to planned in conjunction with, which relates to the two committees. So it would now read, participate in the town's annual Culture Days event using town facilities, including but not limited to Greater Napanee's Historic Town Hall, which will be planned in conjunction with the Municipal Heritage Committee. So those are the four changes. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Is there any questions or comments for Chris with respect to his report or his presentation? Seeing none, I think the changes are minor in nature, Chris, and I don't think they affect the overall integrity of the mandate itself from what I've seen anyway. So thank you for that. Councillor Hicks.
I will move staff recommendation and request that sorry, Jessica. Oh, it's the witching hour. Move that the requested changes be implemented per staff's report. Is that good? Thank you.
From what I'm hearing from Councillor Hicks, you're suggesting that council receive for information the Arts Advisory Committee recommendation mandate letter report and further that council endorse the mandate letter changes proposed by the committee. Moved by Councillor Hicks. Seconded by Deputy Mayor Calver. If there's no further comments, questions, or concerns, all in favor of that motion? Opposed? The motion is carried. Next matter is cemetery crane purchase non-standard procurement. Mr. Brown, I think that's yours as well. So whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, so I just wanted to bring this report forward to update council as we're working through our capital items. You'll recall that we provided a report on November 21st when we were talking about capital purchases that we would like to buy a hoist crane, if you will, that would be installed in the back of our cemetery 3/4 ton pickup truck. So as we looked at that, the budgeted price for that was $18,500. And at that level, we are able to go out and get 3 formal quotes because it's under the $20,000 threshold in our procurement policy. So as we started to look for these quotes, it became clear that Atlas Polar is the exclusive distributor of the HIAB cranes, which is the one that we want. We've seen these in the field with other cemetery companies. We've also seen these at industry trade shows. That is the crane that we want. So Atlas Polar is the exclusive distributor of these cranes in all of Canada, and local dealers must source the equipment from Atlas Polar. So that made it very difficult to actually get more than one quote. Thankfully, we have a local dealer right here in town, which is Tim's Trucking. That is who provided us the initial budget quote. So we are seeking approval to buy that from them through Atlas Polar, of course. If you have any questions on that, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks, Chris. Is there any questions or comments with respect to, go ahead, Councilor Pennell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chris, I do believe I read in the report too that you could not go outside of the territory to purchase it as well. Is that correct?
Correct, through your worship. So we did go outside the region to seek other quotes, and we were directed back to Atlas Polar to say, no. They're not allowed to give you a quote. The only quote that you can get in your region is from Tim's Trucking.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Pennell. Is there any other questions or comments? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Cower.
I think it's wonderful we're using a local company. It's good work, and the HIAB is the best on the market.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Cower. If there is nothing further, we do have a staff recommendation that council receive for information the Parks, Recreation, and Culture Cemetery Crane Purchase Non-Standard Procurement Report, and further that council receive for information delegated authority memo, and further that council approve the single source purchase of a HIAB crane sourced through Tim's Trucking. Moved by Councilor Hicks, seconded by Deputy Mayor Calver. If there's no further comments, questions, or concerns, all in favor of that motion. Opposed, motion's carried. Next matter on the list is Growth and Infrastructure 2025 Snowplow Trucks Purchase Report. And Mr. Nobes, I think you're going to deal with this matter. So whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Worship. Staff are before council this evening with a fairly lengthy recommendation, and it's specifically related to the purchase of one single axle plow truck, which was in the approved capital budget. And the second portion was for the replacement of a truck that was involved in a rollover accident and the associated procurement for the replacement of that. So I'll start with item number 1, which is the capital approved single axle plow truck. Staff went through the canoe procurement process. We received responses through that procurement process, and we are recommending the low bid of a 2026 Freightliner M2-106 single axle plow truck from Abby Schmidt Group for the sum total of $417,945.80, including taxes, which represented the low bid. And further, that council approve an additional $5,000 to outfit the truck with additional lighting, in the AVL system, and a few other odds and sods that are not provided through those vendors. This would result in a net cost after tax refunding of about $381,000. So meaning this would be approximately $39,000 under budget. And what we would recommend is that at time of delivery, any unspent monies, so the difference between budget and actual cost, would go back into the fleet reserve to continue to build that fleet reserve up. The second item on the recommendations tonight is related to replacement of truck number 1408, which was involved in a rollover accident earlier this year. The insurance claim process has yielded the truck as a total loss, and it was fully insured. This was the last year that it was fully insured, so we got very lucky in the timing. And the replacement cost that insurance will provide is just over $430,000. So staff again went through the canoe procurement process. and received two submissions. And we're recommending a 2026 International HV 607 SBA tandem axle plow truck from Rush Truck Centers of Canada Limited for the sum of $480,000, 513 cents, including all the taxes. So at the end of the day, the net cost after tax refunding would be 437,000-ish dollars. Including an additional $5,000 to, again, outfit that with additional lights, AVL system, et cetera. We're looking at an overall budget impact for the replacement of that truck being around $7,000, which is, we're quite lucky in that ultimately. So staff are recommending the approval of the purchase of those two trucks, as well as the execution of the intact insurance proof of loss claims form, which would enable Intact to provide the town a check for that $430,000. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Overall, staff we're happy to see the submissions come in, and we're confident in the recommendations being put forward, representing low bid for both vehicles.
Thanks, Michael. Is there any questions or comments for Michael with respect to his report or presentation here this evening? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Comer.
Yeah, thank you, through your worship. I know we got to get the trucks replaced. I get that. It was all in the budget. We did have a rollover, but the additional $5,000, if there's money there, we're going to be saving. Do we need to do this $5,000 above and beyond, or how's that working out? If we're going to, you talk about saving 37,000, but I'm just trying to see all of this.
Through your worship, so what staff are seeking is that council authorize the purchase of the truck of the quoted value, and that council also authorize spending up to $5,000 to outfit that. So it would ultimately result in 400 and let's just see here. The difference would be around $39,000 after spending up to $5,000. That would then go back into the fleet reserve. So we're seeking that approval to purchase that truck, outfit with additional items, all within budget, under budget, ultimately.
Okay, so it's not an extra $10,000 you're asking for then between the two trucks, 5 and 5?
No, correct. So the net cost after tax refunding and adding in the $5,000 in outfitting is $381,000 approximately, where budget was $420,000.
Okay, and these new trucks, are they going to be equipped with, cameras, like, I'm lost for words, like I've got a camera in my truck that records everything that goes on, both inside the cab as well as out? Are our vehicles equipped with that?
Through you, your worship, currently we do have dash cams. We are working towards a more robust system where it's both dash cam but also exterior facing cameras, where forward facing, rear facing, facing the wing and the plow, getting more coverage. So we'll be coming back to council for next year's budget cycle to seek authorization to begin to outfit all of our plows with that more enhanced video recording capability. But yes, we do have as a standard now our the dash cam in place that's continually recording during operation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Covers. Go ahead, Councilor Pennell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Michael, just expanding on that, do the dash cams now or the dash cams in the future, will they record inside the cab?
Through your worship, it's driver facing.
Yes.
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but I will take that back to staff and we can certainly report back. I think there's the capability to do so. I'm not certain if it's something that our staff are looking at doing specifically right now, but would be happy to report back on that specifically. What we are looking at is a more enhanced exterior facing cameras to show existing roadway conditions, time of day, other things that are occurring outside the truck, but point well received around interior as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think I would like to see something on that, just so that we cover everything. And I appreciate the fact of the plow locations and stuff like that as well. I noticed that the deliveries are very favorable for us on these trucks as well.
Through your worship, yeah, we got lucky with this rollover that occurred earlier in the year. We've been leveraging mutual aid with City of Kingston. So we're going to be sending that truck back to the City of Kingston in the not too distant future. They'll have another for us for the start of the next coming winter season until the new trucks arrive. So we're lucky that we've been able to lean on the City of Kingston to get us through that period of need. So yeah, we're happy with the delivery time that's been identified. I should touch on too, it's included in the report, but tariffs are an unknown. The suppliers have not been able to commit on what, if any, tariff impacts might there be. So if they have all of the necessary components to build these trucks in their shop now, it's unlikely that tariffs would be impacting the bottom line cost at the time of delivery. But if not, then there certainly might be some level of impact. As we get some more information from these suppliers between now and delivery, we'll report back to council. But we don't pay until it's delivered, and all suppliers have been very forthcoming in saying if there are any tariffs applied, they're being directly passed on to the end buyer. So very much an unknown. We're keeping tabs on it, but there are a lot more questions than answers at this point in time.
Great, thank you.
I think that's a very polite way of saying it. Thanks, Michael. Go ahead, Councillor Hicks.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just going back to the tariffs, it's not the total value of the truck that's affected because, yeah, so I just wanted people to be aware, we're not looking at a retaliatory tariff of 50% on the entire cost. It's only on the specific components that we are importing. So if it was just the box, then it's just the box. It's not everything else. So
through your worship, that is correct.
Thanks. Thanks, Councillor Hicks. Is there any other questions or comments for Michael? We do have a staff recommendation. Seeing none, staff recommendation, a fairly lengthy one that council received for information, the Growth and Infrastructure Services 2025 snowplow trucks purchase report, and further that council approve the ordering of one 2026 Freightliner M2-106 single axle plow truck from AB Schmidt Group for the sum of $417,945.80, including taxes, representing the low bid, and further that council approve the use of $5,000 to purchase and install remaining items to outfit the 2026 Freightliner M2-106 single axle plow truck for use, including two-way radio AVL system and remaining 360-degree lights, and further that council authorize a transfer to the fleet reserve for the difference between the cost of a delivery and a capital budget amount for the 2026 Freightliner M2-106 single axle plow truck, and further that council approve the ordering of one 2026 International HV 607 SBA tandem axle plow truck from Rush Truck Centers of Canada Limited for the sum of $480,513.48, including taxes, representing the low bid to replace truck number 14-08 through insurance claim number 803-554-9921, and further that council approve the use of $5,000 to purchase and install remaining items to outfit the 2026 International HV 607 SBA tandem truck axle plow truck for use, including two-way radio AVL system and remaining 360-degree lights. And further that council authorize the execution of the intact insurance proof of loss claims form under claim number 803-554-9921 to receive compensation of the truck 14-08 for the net amount of $430,988.10. And further that council accepts the procurement process undertaken by municipal staff as having met the goals and principles of the municipal procurement policies forming part of the Town of Greater Napanee procurement bylaw. Moved by Deputy Mayor Calver, seconded by Councillor Martin, and thanks folks for not making me say that again. All in favor of the motion? Opposed? Motion's carried. Next matter up, Executive Services Proposed Budget Amendment Bylaw Enforcement Vehicle, and I see Madam Clerk going to the front, so Jess, whenever you're ready, we'll have a conversation.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. Just a quick bit of background on this. When we initially brought our proposal through the budget to expand the bylaw department, our thought at the time was to phase in the impact to taxpayers by putting off the budget or the vehicle discussion until the next budget. When we went to talk about what that transitional vehicle would look like, it was flagged that we have been collecting development charges for quite a number of years under the understanding that as our community grows, eventually our bylaw department is going to need to expand. And the balance of that reserve is actually sitting at $120,000. So there is more than enough in there to facilitate this purchase. That is the only reason that this is coming to you tonight. I am well aware that council has made it clear that they would prefer to do all capital items within the budget cycle and not deviate from that. And if that is still your direction tonight, completely understand that that is a reasonable stance for council to take. But as there is the opportunity to fund this with no impact to the taxpayer out of development charges, we thought it was reasonable to raise it as an option here tonight.
Great, thanks, Jess. Is there any questions or comments? Go ahead, Councillor Hicks.
Thank you, Your Worship. One question. So the $120,000 that's in the development charge budget, that is specifically earmarked for bylaw and cannot be used for anything else?
That's correct.
Thank you, because there was discussion earlier tonight about the imminent need for a new pumper truck. But that money is going to have to come from the development charges earmarked for fire services directly as opposed to, okay, thank you very much. That answers my question.
Thank you, Councillor Hicks. Is Councillor Purnell?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Jessica, we were provided a really nice chart on our last meeting with staff, with what we have for staff. And currently we only have one bylaw officer. When are we getting the second one and for this truck?
Through Your Worship, we are hoping that we might have someone as soon as next month. We did just have the posting close last week, I believe, or a couple of weeks ago. So we're actively in the hiring process and hoping to have someone fairly soon.
Okay, and that's what we need the second vehicle for, is for the second staff member?
Yes, through Your Worship. Eventually, our hope with the department is that we can see one person potentially responding to issues in the south area of the community, while another person can respond to issues in the north area of the community. We understand that we probably don't need two vehicles for everybody every day, but we'd like to have the option that if there are issues ongoing in because we are a very geographically large area, that there's the ability to do that and not have to schedule everything around the truck. Again, we're also aware that that's certainly what we're going to need to do in the short term, because vehicles don't become instantaneously available as soon as they're approved by council.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Councillor Purnell. Deputy Mayor Carver.
Thank you, through your worship. I just, A, I guess, why does it have to be a truck? And B, what about all the vehicles that sit out there at 99 right now? There's quite a number of vehicles that sit there. Some never move, some do move. And there's vehicles kind of sitting around the recreation department once in a while too. Like, I'm just trying to think, we just passed a budget less than a month ago. And now we want to win and change the budget. And that kind of doesn't set well with me at all. I'm just trying to find out what these vehicles are that sit there. I mean, there's a number of cars and stuff. There's a number of trucks around as well. I just find it hard to imagine there's not a truck available when needed.
Through Your Worship, I know there are some of those vehicles at least one of those vehicles was earmarked for sale, and we're only holding on to it in case we need it for bylaw because we didn't have a truck available. A truck was the recommendation. We certainly believe we don't require the truck. We don't require both of the bylaw vehicles to be a truck, but it was determined that that would be the most useful for the corporation for interdepartmental uses, as it allows people to carry materials to and from sites. But again, if this was not available to be funded fully out of development charges, I would not be bringing this to you tonight. And I fully understand if council does not want to make any budget amendments at this time.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Calver. Thank you, Jessica. Is there any other questions or comments with respect to the report, Jessica's presentation? And we'll be looking for a motion at some point, or some direction anyway. I see no other questions. Councillor Hicks.
Not so much a question, but I'll be in favor of alternative option number 2, which is to utilize the existing vehicle, to put the $5,000 into that, see where we're at. And then next year, know that we need something, because next year, and I understand what you're saying about interdepartmental use. I totally understand it and it makes sense. Buying a Honda Fit isn't really going to be of much use to the town. So having something, if a truck breaks down, you've got the option to use a truck. You can put a plow on it in the winter, you can put a whatever. So, but for now, I'm in favor of option number 2.
I'm sensing that the motion you'd like to make is that council receive for information the executive services proposed budget amendment for bylaw enhancement vehicle report, and that council direct that no amendments be made to the 2025 capital budget at this time. Okay, thank you. Moved by Councillor Hicks, seconded by Deputy Mayor Calver. Is there any other further comments, questions, or concerns with respect to the motion that's on the floor? Go ahead, Councillor Pennell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just to be clear, again, I just need clarification that 100% of that $70,000 could come from development charges and not impact the budget that is in place right now.
Go ahead, Alan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to confirm Councillor Pennell's question, yes, that is correct. It is fully fundable through DCs.
Okay, thank you. And if we were to put the $5,000 into the existing car to get that one back on the road, if you will, those funds would come from where?
We have a couple options with that. We can fund that through this reserve, as it's still adding to the growth of that department to support the same need. So you can change your direction if it's still supporting that same initial project as outlined. So we could do it from there if needed. Ideally, we would be able to find that in operating in someone's budget, and that could be a recommendation that could wait until year end and we can see where things are at. If it's not found through operating, then I could come forward with a recommendation to fund through that DC reserve. The other option is our fleet reserve. Our general fleet reserve is another place that we could take from if needed. But at this point in time, it would be my hope that we could fund through operating.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Pennell. Councillor Hicks.
So, thank you, Your Worship, through you. Since Councillor Pennell opened the door, I'm going to wander through and ask my question. The $5,000, does the vehicle have to be re-safetied? Is it just a matter of getting it replated, getting it back on? Like, that's the insurance? Please tell me we're not spending $5,000 to have decals put on the doors, because that's just... The $5,000 is the basic cost of, you'd still have to put that money out even if it was a new vehicle to do the plating and insurance, et cetera.
So through your worship, I believe there's some of that would be stuff to do with a new vehicle. If there's anything like getting it equipped with radio, lights, those kind of things, we would try to make sure best as we could that that would be compatible to be taken out and moved on to whatever the next vehicle is. But a number of different things. I believe we might have to do a journal entry to write off the remaining value to utilities and cost it over to the town. So just a few things like that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hicks. Is there any other questions or comments before we call for the vote? Seeing none, all call for the vote. All in favor of the motion that's on the floor? Yeah, it's option number 2, which is to make no amendments to the 2020 capital budget, in layman's terms, that not to buy the new truck right now. All in favor of the motion that's on the floor? Opposed? And I guess I have to vote, but it's not going to make any difference. So I will vote in favor of the motion that's on the floor, but we still only have 3 votes. So the motion. Sorry?
Sorry, through your worship, now that Councillor Shank has left, motion passes with 3 votes. Because that's your quorum is now 5, so.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, for clarifying that. And I voted for the motion that's on the floor. So the motion has passed. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Moving on. Executive Services Bylaw Enforcement Standards Policy Review and Update. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Councilor Purnell.
Mr. Mayor, through you to Madam Clerk, could I just have clarification on that, please? Because if we went down to 2 councillors here, then we would still have quorum?
Sorry, through your worship, quorum is 4, and you just need a majority vote. So if you only had 4 councillors here, you'd still need 3 votes because that would be your clear majority. That was me muddling my words a little bit. So at this point, with 5 members, 3 votes carries. If we had 4 members, 3 votes would still carry. If we had 3 members, we'd all have to go home.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Next on the agenda, Executive Services Bylaw Enforcement Standards Policy Review and Update. And I'm not sure who's going to start, but the floor will be yours.
So through your worship, tonight I'd like to formally introduce our new Senior Bylaw Officer, Arthur Cook. He's going to be joining me in this presentation. This is adjacent to the service level discussion you recently had with the fire chief. It's not quite that same thing, but in a similar vein. Our department will be bringing a fulsome service level review to council later in this year. But tonight we're bringing this because the policy requires that when we have a substantial change either to our bylaws or to our capacity, we need to check in with you to make sure that our enforcement priorities are aligned with council's goals. There's a lot of supplemental information attached to this report. It's not our intent to go through all of that tonight, but if council has any questions, either now or after this meeting, very happy to have those discussions. But in the interest of time, I'm going to stick to a few main points here. So almost all of our regulatory bylaws are discretionary service. Council can decide whether we have the bylaws, what they have in them, and to what extent they are enforced. So this policy helps to ensure that staff are prioritizing their workloads and communicating with residents in alignment with council's goals. It's not financially reasonable or viable to staff your bylaw department to the level that every bylaw is enforced to the maximum in every instance. So this policy helps to establish what council has determined is the priority to focus on. So in the report, you'll see there are some minor changes to the Appendix A being proposed. Those are highlighted in red in one of the attachments. The biggest area that we are seeking your direction on tonight is how you want us to utilize that additional resource that's been added. So option 1, an encampment focus, would see us aiming to visit places like Conservation, Springside Park, those places with a high volume of resident complaints. We would aim to get there 4 times a week, and any other parks and public spaces shown on our encampment map, we'd be aiming to get there at least once a week. This would leave very little time for us to do anything else, so all of our other bylaw services would be expected to stay at or around that 2023-2024 enforcement level. The option 2, that balanced focus, encampments still seeing more attention than they did last year. We'd be trying to get out to that Conservation Springside Park at least once a week, more often if our call volume requires us to be out there more often. And then to all of those other parks and public spaces at least once a month, again, more often if call volume dictates. But that would free up some time to increase our proactive and patrol presence in other areas of the community for other things. These are what we thought would be the 2 most likely scenarios, and we're confident that we can meet either of these 2 standards. But if you want to see something different, we would request some direction on what you'd like to see and then some time to assess whether that is doable or what else might have to give and take to make that priority achievable. So at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Arthur.
So further to the service matrix and all the other bylaws we have, we're also suggesting some seasonal priorities. So as certain bylaws come into effect or are more relevant at certain times of the year, in addition to our overall strategy of enforcement through education, we wanted to add and make council aware of some suggestions here for our seasonal priorities. This would be short, targeted campaigns, both informational and then also possibly some enforcement options as well. There are some examples in the additional attached material of what that would look like. But this would be a temporary increase for a short period of time in relation to these issues. These are some of the recommendations that we have, but we are open to any direction council has on other issues or issues not listed in this area as well. And then in addition to all this, another thing that we wanted to bring to council's attention is bylaws use of the E11 system. We have refreshed and further developed the online reporting tool that we use for our reporting from citizens in Napanee. It has allowed us to get better information and collaborate more with citizens when they're reporting issues. So you can see in this beautiful flow chart that I made up here that when a citizen reports an issue to us and they flag it for bylaw, it'll come into our office and it's reviewed by an officer. Based on that review, it's determined if it is a bylaw issue. If so, it stays in our department and we'll process that. If it turns out to be something else or it's more aptly handled by Public Works or utilities or whatnot, it's referred to the other department through UN1. But when it does stay with us, that case is assigned to an officer for an investigation, at which point in time the citizen is notified that the status has changed from open or submitted through to the status change update. And then further in the investigation, as we enter our notes and details about that investigation, we will update the citizen through notices or status changes. And that case file, as it goes, also allows for citizens to update further information. So as the situation evolves or additional information is provided, citizen could update comments, photos, videos, anything like that to us, which would also aid us in our investigation process. And then when that investigation is complete, a sort of final case note is added, update, and we reach out to the citizen to inform them of the status of the conclusion of that investigation before we close that case. This is a tool that's helping us support our service levels, and it's using a pre-existing software that we already have a more efficient and effective manner, and it's increased our interactions with our touch points with those of us who are interacting with our department. And then open it up to any further questions council has.
Great, thanks, Arthur. Go ahead, Councillor Hicks.
Thank you, Worship. Down in the, I'll say the meat and potatoes, all the details that you provided, and I did read through it. When you're patrolling proactively the encampments and the hot spots, you had mentioned in the report that you typically go with a partner agency, or in some cases it's the fire department, et cetera. Now that there are two bylaw officers, are you looking at having them partner up to go together? Or would you still be having one person out doing maybe a different park or the south or north end of the municipality and the other going with a partner agency?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hicks. The goal would be to have two people go. So in the past with one officer, that's resulted in participation from one of our partner agencies, as we otherwise would be increasing our service level on the encampment front. That if it was to look, if it was to be more than it was last year in terms of touch points or bases, that would involve two officers attending. So it would not be a situation where one officer is in Springside Park and another officer is in another location. They would be attending those locations together. And that is that we can only rely on so much support from our partner agencies, as they also have other priorities as well. And we don't want to burn out any of those additional resources that we use to support us. So it would be partially with service agencies, but mostly with the other officer.
Okay, that answered that question. And it was the answer I expected, but so in not burning out those resources daily or 4 times a week with them, hopefully they're going to be as responsive as they have been in the past when you do call them, because you do need them, because the 2 of you have discovered an issue. So I just want to make sure that we're not, how do I want to phrase this? It's not a case of letting anyone off the hook, but there's still a level of involvement from the partner agencies here.
Yes, through your worship, Councillor Hicks. The agencies, fire, OPP, the elements from Pellis would still be involved and participate with us, just as we increase our touch points in the parks. Our partner agencies aren't necessarily able to match that increased participation as well, but they would still be as participate as they were last year.
Thanks, Councillor Hicks. I think Mr. Grant wants to weigh in, then I'll go to Deputy Mayor Calver.
Sure. Thank you, through Mr. Mayor. Just to add to that, so to Councillor Hicks's question, the function of each agency is fundamentally different. The responsibilities are fundamentally different. That wouldn't materially change. So I would suggest that our investigation capacity would increase. Our ability to have boots on the ground would increase to know where things are unfolding. But we would still rely on our partners to exercise their authorities and obligations as we normally would. We would probably just have more information for them.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. Deputy Mayor Calver.
Thank you, through your worship. So when we hire a second bylaw enforcement officer, you're going to be teamed up most of the time, visiting all these encampments and stuff. Are we still using the South Frontenac bylaw for our parking bylaws?
Through your worship, yes, we do still have budget support in this year's budget to renew our contract with Frontenac to provide that supplemental bylaw support. We are meeting with them later this week once we hear what council's direction for the department is this year to set out what that schedule is going to look like.
Okay, because it was hiring having 2 bylaw enforcement people tied up constantly doing encampments and stuff. It's not leaving any time for, complaints of yard and that sort of thing. So I'm just want to make sure we're all covered here.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Calver. Go ahead, Mr. Grant.
So through Mr. Mayor to the Deputy Mayor, and I think that would actually be the specific focus of the report this evening is staff is seeking direction of where you would like those resources placed. So should you wish for increased, encampments, patrols, that would necessarily require us to have 2 bylaw officers go together. There would be occasions where we'd have the fire department, but, for very specific issues, but they would also be doing their own education work and the like. Should council wish to go with a more balanced approach, we would have some more, patrols within encampments, but that would likely free up bylaw officers not always to be together unless I'm mistaken, which I'm seeing that I'm not. In essence, that's the specific question that staff is seeking direction on, and that will inform the service levels that come before you later this year. We would just like to make sure that with the extra investment that council has made, that we're directing them in a manner that is in line with council's wishes.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. Go ahead, Jessica.
Through your worship, I just wanted to throw out there as well. I think it is important for us to say, the reason for the 2 officers to do this is not because we think this is not that the visiting of the encampments is inherently more dangerous than other work that officers do, but because outside of specific locations within Conservation and Springside Park, a lot of those encampments are in tucked away, non-visible, not necessarily near a busy road or high traffic, and that's more of the reason why we believe 2 people are important for officer safety. It's more of that working alone and outside of the public line of sight, whereas a lot of the other work that they do is closer to their vehicle in a higher traffic area and not a statement on the relative danger of being near an encampment site. just wanted to make sure that that was put out there.
Thanks, Jessica. Go ahead, Councillor Pennell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Arthur, thanks for this report. So if council chose to go with the balanced approach, we would still, you'd still be visiting encampments, and we would still be able to use the added enforcement officer for other things that are going on in the municipality. Not saying that the encampments is not on the forefront of everyone's mind, but there is other things that are going on in this municipality as well. So I just think that with going with the balanced approach, you're still going to be reactive anyway if there's something that needs to be done. If you need to get to an encampment because something is going on that's taken priority over, say, a parking ticket, both of you are going to go or that sort of thing. So maybe just if you could explain a little bit more about what your balanced approach would be like.
I just going to intervene before you answer, Arthur. We're at 9:57. Is there a will of council to go beyond 10 o'clock? And if there is, we'll need a motion to go beyond 10 o'clock, and then I'll address the next thing next. So move to go beyond 10 o'clock. Councillor Hicks, seconded by Councillor or Deputy Mayor Calver. We do need a unanimous decision on this. All in favor of the motion that's on the floor? Opposed? Motion is carried. We're going past 10 o'clock. And I just want to, we're going to get, this is a fairly in-depth conversation. I do think we do have an option that if we don't get to where we need to be tonight, we can also put this over and have it brought back at the next meeting so that we can make a decision on it as well. Am I right, Madam Clerk?
Through your worship, absolutely. I think that might have been option 3 in the report, is if you'd like more time, we can certainly put this report back on the next council agenda or whatever council agenda is preferred to let you sit with the information, maybe have some one-on-one conversations with either one of us. And I did also just want to raise, we've already committed to coming at some point this summer with an overview of where our parks bylaw has gotten us, how it's worked on the ground with our encampment protocol in practice. So if at that point in time, whichever option here is chosen is not working or is not having the results council would like, we can always switch at that point as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Madam Clerk. And I apologize, Arthur, for, do we know what the question is? And are you sure? If or not, we'll get Councillor Pennell to repeat it.
Yep. Through your worship to Councillor Pennell. I believe it was in relation to the balanced approach and what that would look like in particular. Okay. So that would see it would still see an attendance in encampment sites throughout the municipality. You would see an increase from last year, but it's not necessarily the 4 times weekly approach as the first option is. It would allow for us to have a more balanced approach to other issues, so yards or parking or other issues that we enforce as well. And it would also leave room for us to react to encampment calls. So if we, that option wouldn't preclude us from, if we received an encampment call in the week, we wouldn't say, oh, we've already been to the parks once, we're not going again, because that's how it works. It would allow us time and space to react to calls for encampments or to calls for other issues as well.
That's great. I really appreciate that answer. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, thanks, Councillor Pennell. Is there any other questions, comments, or concerns? And are we willing to entertain a motion tonight, or do we wish to put this over to our next meeting? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Calver, and then I'll go to Councillor Hicks.
I was just going to make a motion to accept option number 2 of balanced enforcement.
Okay, and just to assist you here is as the council received for information, the executive services bylaw enforcement standards, policy review and update report, and for that council support. We do have to make a decision on whether we want to support Appendix B, the seasonal enforcement priorities. Do we want to support that as well, or do we want to tweak it? Do we want to take stuff out? Do we want to add things into it? That's the proposed changes, which is the seasonal priorities chart that we have in the description. Councillor Hicks.
Thank you. Through your worship, may I ask for clarification on something?
Absolutely. We'll get a motion on the floor here eventually.
Okay. I'm not opposed to the motion, but I would just like to know, when I look at draft Appendix B versus Appendix B, what is the difference between page 28 and page, I think it was 10 in the presentation?
So through your worship, the only difference is that we've added some explanatory language if we're adding it into the policy that explains that this is as resources permit and that this is a temporary. So if the baseline for the priority level is that this is reactive only, temporarily, seasonally, short limited term, we will up that to proactive, maybe patrol based on how resources are available, and as well as an education component. It's just more to explain, so there's not just the chart on its own. That is the only difference. The details of the chart are the same.
May I?
Go ahead, Councillor Hicks.
Okay, you used the word educate, and that's where I want to go on this. I'm in favor of the balanced approach, and may I assume, it's an ugly word, but I'm going to assume that you will be going to the hot spots and explaining, hey, this is the map, this is what was implemented for the encampment protocol. So there's an education component before you actually start doing your patrols on a twice weekly basis. You might have to hit them hard in the beginning of the warm weather months, and then.
Yeah, so through your worship, it's not, actually it's not in this draft Appendix B. We'll add it in maybe before we come back to you at the next meeting. Our intention would absolutely be, once we see the increase in encampments in our parks, that would be the season, the point somewhere in the spring where we would do a targeted blitz there. And I will say that so far, we have started, education has been very successful so far. We've had a few encampment sites that has started with first contact with the map to explain, hey, you can't be in this particular area for these reasons. And typically the encampment has moved to a different location within 24 hours of that contact.
Thanks, Councillor Hicks. Thanks, Jessica. Deputy Mayor Calver, I think we're good with the balanced option, the balanced focus option. But I think staff is looking for some direction with respect to Appendix B. Are we good with Appendix B? Do we want to change Appendix B? Do we want to add things, take it out? And Appendix B is the chart on page, sorry, there's no page number here, but it's the one that has the winter, spring, summer, and fall with respect to parking animals and yards.
I think we'll go with B. I think B is fair.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, we are going to receive for information the Executive Services Bylaw Enforcement Standards Policy Review and Update Report. Further, that council support the inclusion of the proposed policy Appendix B, seasonal enforcement priorities. And further, that council directs staff to implement the proposed enforcement option of number 2, a balanced focus. And further, that council directs staff to bring forward an amendment to the bylaw enforcement standards policy which reflects these changes. Did I get everything? Moved by Deputy Mayor Calver, seconded by Councillor Hicks. And you got a question, Ange?
Thank you, Your Worship. One final question. This motion also encompasses Appendix A, which is where the actual details lie in the service level matrix, correct? So we're accepting what's outlined in red and what the priority is and whether it's proactive, reactive, et cetera. So that's part of balanced approach, Appendix B and Appendix A.
Through your worship, that is correct. Prior to the next meeting, we will look at that once more, and knowing that we've got the direction of balanced approach, we'll see if we can bump any of those from reactive to proactive based on what we think is reasonable to accommodate.
Great, thanks. Is there any other comments, questions, or concerns with respect to the motion that's on the floor? And I think we're there. Seeing none, all in favor of the motion that's on the floor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Next matter on our agenda is Executive Services Dog Licensing Program Updates and Approval. And Madam Clerk, are you going to deal with that one or? Okay, go ahead, Arthur. You're up.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the staff report is in response to a deputation that council received on November 26th of last year, and what we have found out as a result of that. I know that it's late, so I don't want to keep you too late, and I'll be as fast as I can. There's some information regarding ownership and licensing, both for dogs in Canada and also in Napanee. Statistics are hard to find, but essentially we've been able to determine that there is a large number of dogs we suspect that are in the municipality that are not currently licensed. Although from the licensing that we do have, we have a relatively high rate of return. So for the animals that are licensed in Napanee, the appropriate number relicense those animals every year. That other percentage point is likely attributed to people moving out of our municipality, animals sadly passing away, or some other issues, so that attrition that's there. The nuts and bolts of this report is a recommendation to streamline the dog licensing process. So I know that this has been different in the past, but that we adopt a coined term of educate, incentivize, and enforce for our dog licensing program. That would mean bringing dog licensing to the sole licensing point of the town of Napanee, whether that be online through our online systems or in person at the town administration building at 99 Advance Avenue as the 2 points of contact for individuals to license dogs. Currently, when the program that is in place right now existed, there were multiple locations in the community that also sold dog licensing. Almost all of those, with the exception of one, have stopped participating in the licensing program and no longer license their animals. Part of that process is a paper-based system and how that information transits back to the town. And it can be at times complicated or take a while for that information to get back, whereby a dog might be licensed on paper, but might not actually be in the system. So if an officer were to attend a location or interact with somebody, there actually wouldn't be a record of that licensing there. To make those matters work easier, we're asking or recommending that the council approves the licensing to come back to the town as the sole body, that we introduce an education campaign. So as noted in the appendix from the other conversation that we just had, a combination of printed materials, social media posts, advertisements to locations in town, vet clinics, places that dog walkers frequent, whatnot, to inform and remind citizens that dog licensing is necessary in Napanee, that the town reintroduce an incentivization program, so the reintroduction of the Rents Pets gift card program, to both encourage people to license their animals and to help offset the cost of that licensing fee for citizens. And then an enforcement piece to that. So as part of those seasonal priorities, a increased presence in the spring for an educational approach to enforcement, and then a conversation around enforcement. So currently, the last few years, we've resulted, our enforcement presence for dog licensing has resulted in a lot of warnings. And the goal would be to bring our enforcement stance on dog licensing in line with the rest of our enforcement stances, where we do proceed through warnings. But if those warnings are unsuccessful, we would move to a tougher enforcement stance of ultimately ticketing or fining in those cases. There are sort of three recommendations, there are options there for council to consider. One is the staff recommendation. The second would be to continue with the system that we have in place. And then the third would be obviously council's discretion, any other amendments that they'd like to make. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Great. Thanks, Arthur. Is there any questions or comments with respect to report the presentation? Councillor Hicks, then I'll go to Councillor Pennell.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. On page 2 of the, page 1 of the program information, you're going to remove Roblin Gas Bar and Critter Comforts. It's down located on right hand So I assume that this was the existing document and it's going to be tweaked before you release the hand. Okay. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Councillor Hicks. Councillor Pennell?
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Arthur, I just want clarification that if we reintroduce the Wren's Pets gift certificate of $20, that there's absolutely no cost to the town to do this.
Through your worship, that's correct. There's no cost to the town. It's just an email from us to our contract administrator to say, we asked you to turn this switch off on the back end. Can you please turn it back on?
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Pennell. Is there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, we do, staff is looking for some direction with respect to this, I think. We do have a staff recommendation that council receive for information, the Executive Services Dog Licensing Program updates and approval report, and further council endorse the recommended changes proposed within the report. That's the staff recommendation. Do we have anyone that would like to make that by way of motion, or is there another motion that someone would like to make? Councillor Hicks.
I will move staff recommendation and reintroduce the incentive for dog licensing. Thank you.
Moved by Councillor Hicks. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Pennell. Is there any further comments, questions, or concerns with respect to the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion that's on the floor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Next matter, Executive Services Taxi Bylaw Review. And Ms. Kennelly, I think you're going to be dealing with that one. Whenever you're ready, you're more than welcome to start.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'll just give a brief overview of the changes recommended for the taxi bylaw. A few changes to the definitions are proposed, such as adding a service animal definition that's consistent with the definition used in other town bylaws, and replacing the term police record check with vulnerable sector check to ensure that there's clarity for staff and applicants on which type of record check is required. We are recommending that the deadline renewal or the renewal deadline be changed to March instead of December, as this will make the expiry date consistent with other licensing that the town does. And we've also heard some concerns that December is a busy time of year for the taxi companies. So it's not a great time of year for them to be submitting their documents for renewal. So this should alleviate that concern. And we're also recommending that if a driver owner is applying for their first license from the town after September 30th, that they only pay 1/2 of the new license fee so that they aren't paying for a full year worth of a license. And because they will also need to pay again to renew their license by the following March if the proposed deadline is changed. This is a one-time fee that would only be available if the license is being applied for after September 30th and for a first license only. A similar practice to this is permitted for kennel licenses. We're also recommending eliminating the requirement for taxi owners to have a physical office in Greater Napanee and eliminating the limit on the number of taxi cabs permitted to operate within the town, as we feel these are no longer necessary restrictions to have in the bylaw. Another recommended elimination is the requirement for taxi owners to submit a record check. Taxi owners may not necessarily be driving their taxi cabs themselves, so we don't feel it's necessary to ask for this within the taxi owner application. However, if the owner is also driving their taxi cabs, then they would need to apply for a driver's license as well, and a record check would be required with that application. Some updated language is also recommended, adding e-cigarettes and cannabis to the section that prohibits drivers from allowing anyone to smoke inside a taxi cab, and changing the fare disputes to be directed to the OPP instead of the town, since the town no longer sets the rates. We would also like to implement a late renewal fee that is double the new driver's license fee. So this would be $80. We feel that implementing this late fee would help ensure that driver's licenses are renewed on time, And with the proposed expiry deadline of March, drivers would have from January 1st to March 1st to get their renewal in on time without being charged the late fee. So those are all the changes that we are recommending, and happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks, Shannon. Is there any questions or comments for Shannon with respect to her report or the presentation she made this evening? Go ahead, Councilor Pennell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Shannon, thanks for this. Could you just explain or talk to me a little bit more about not having a physical office here? Would that be so that a neighboring city could operate through here if they are licensed?
So through you, Your Worship, I believe it's just mainly recommended for removal just because it's not necessarily something that a company would need to be able to establish a company in Napanee. So it's kind of a barrier for companies. I'm not sure, Jessica, if you have anything to add.
So through your worship, we did in our review identify that that particular language is potentially a barrier for any new taxi companies that might want to set up here. So right now, the way our bylaw is written, if a taxi company operates in Kingston and drops people off in Napanee and then leaves, they don't need a license from us. But if they're going to then stay in Napanee and take calls and offer rides from Napanee, we would want them to be licensed through us. Right now, our bylaw doesn't allow that to be done. So the hope is that by taking that language out, it's at least not a barrier to anybody who's looking to expand, potentially from Kingston or Belleville, potentially from Loyalist or Stone Mills, or potentially a virtual-based system that doesn't have any physical office anywhere. Just felt that that language was potentially outdated and limiting options for residents.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good, thanks, Councilor Pennell. Is there any other questions? Go ahead, Councilor Hicks.
Thank you through you, Your Worship. So following up on that, and I'm just going to say Amy's Taxi, I think they still operate in Kingston, Amy's, yeah. If their dispatch is in Kingston and they choose to designate 4 drivers to work within the boundaries of Greater Napanee, those 4 drivers have to provide to the town a vulnerable sector check. They have to get their taxi driver's license through the town, and that particular company would be responsible for renewing for those 4 drivers specifically. I don't know how we would enforce that because we don't have municipal police and, but they could in fact do that, correct? Okay, they don't have to be located. I mean, because fire dispatch is out of Kingston. It's not, so it's basically the same thing, right? It's just if you've got the radios and communication. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Councilor Hicks. Deputy Mayor Cower.
Thank you, through your worship. Just looking at the insurance, we're recommending they have to have a $2 million policy. Is $2 million enough? Like, you got 4 passengers in a vehicle and something catastrophic happens. I know with my own personal or my own commercial vehicle, we carry a $5 million policy. I just don't think 2 million is enough.
So through your worship, that's something we can look into. I can take a look at other municipalities' bylaws and see if it's higher. And I can come back to you with more information on that.
Yeah, that's my only concern. We don't want to make sure that they're adequately covered for sure. And not in your report and doesn't really have any. Do we have in our bylaw a minimum number of taxis a cab company can have, or is there a set number they have to have?
Through your worship, no, there's no minimum.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Deputy Mayor Calver. Is there any other comments, questions, or concerns with respect to the presentation or the report that's in front of us this evening? Seeing none, we do have a recommendation that council receive for information the Executive Services Taxi Bylaw Review Report, and further that a draft taxi bylaw that incorporates the recommendations described in this report be brought forward to a future council meeting for consideration. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Moved by Deputy Mayor Calver, seconded by Councillor Martin. Is there any further comments, questions, or concerns with respect to the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion that's on the floor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Next matter, results of the community consultation on communications preferences. And I see Mr. Grant moving to the front. So Mr. Grant, whenever you're settled in, the floor will be yours.
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor, through your worship to members of council. Subject matter that's near and dear to my heart in terms of creating a corporate communication strategy. Like any strategy, it starts with research and data collection. And so this is the first effort of us putting together a corporate communication strategy that will identify the types of information that we intend to deliver, the method of delivery, the frequency of delivery, and the key to exercising and having a successful corporate communication strategy is you want to gear it towards preferences as best you can, but you also have to make sure that the program you're delivering is in line with the resources that you have to deliver it. And so in doing this as a first step, what we did is we took a look at the survey results of other surveys that had been done. So I've conducted several of these at the City of Hamilton. We took a look at some other municipalities who have conducted similar surveys. We took a look at academic research, Statistics Canada, that sort of thing, to take a look at preferences. When I take a look at the overall summary, just to give you an idea of what we did to conduct this specific survey, we were looking for residents and community stakeholder inputs regarding the type of information they would like to receive and the manner in which they would like to receive it. And as I've mentioned at council before, we live at a time when communications is quite fragmented. Quite often, the way in which individuals receive or consume information varies depending on their age group. So for more traditional communications, radio, newspapers, print copy, that tends to skew older. For younger populations, that tends to be primarily digital. And for people that are in the middle bracket, such as myself, you tend to use both. So depending on where you're going to go with your communication and who your intended audience is, you're going to have to deploy different communications vehicles to reach that audience. So it wouldn't make a ton of sense to go with a primarily paper-based communications campaign if you were looking to reach youth for specific programs or say young mothers. If you were looking to promote seniors programs, you would want to take into account some of the communications vehicles that they prefer. So questions for the survey were similar to other communication surveys that have been done in other municipalities. The survey was conducted from February 3rd to the 24th, 2025. Total of 245 survey results, which is roughly 1.4% of the town's population. What you'll see in following slides is when you take a look at survey results for municipal surveys, it tends to be about 0.5% of the total population. When we did that in the City of Hamilton, it was 0.5%, obviously a much bigger number. So I'm actually quite pleased with the outcome. And as we engage more, my goal is to see that number go up more. Similar to municipal voting turnout rates and that sort of thing, there tends to be a lower engagement at the municipal level, which requires more effort to raise that engagement rate. So it's a good indicator. And when we were promoting this, we had it both digitally and in hard copy promoted at our service desks. And it was promoted on the town's website, social media, radio, newspaper, direct email to service clubs and groups. And we actually had a notification in every municipal tax bill that went in every homeowner's house. So I am satisfied that we made every single effort to reach individuals, and I think it's reflected in above average sort of outcomes. And when you take a look just as a highlight, when you take a look at some of the other municipalities that have gone out with either communication survey, budget survey, community engagement survey that are quite similar Kingston, Quincy West, Northumberland County, and Peterborough, Hamilton, Niagara Falls, Augusta Township, you'll see that on average, the rates tend to be around 0.5% of the total population. That's in general. It may not be what we would want to see overall, but that is sort of the starting point, if you will. And so for reference, our budget survey would have been an average response rate. I'm confident that with a targeted approach that was taken by communications staff, we were able to make that rate much higher. And the results, which I'm going to ask Kylie, who did all of the work, I did like none of the work. But when Kylie goes through the results that we found in our survey are not dissimilar to survey results at other municipalities, survey results I've seen in previous surveys that I've done, literature and studies that have been put out. So it also lets me know that the trends we are seeing are not unexpected. And with that, I will turn things over to Kylie.
Okay, so just gonna change my slide here. All right, so first one, respondents by age group. So the largest group that we saw complete the survey were those age 55 to 74. They were the most engaged in this survey, and then just comparing it to the encampment one that we did in the fall, similarly, they were one of the largest age groups that completed it. So over half of the total responses for this survey came from those 55 to 74. And then just looking, because you'll notice it in the staff report, those 25 and under were relatively unengaged in the survey, which again, comparing it back to the encampment one, same kind of situation. We didn't see as much of a turnout, and I think it goes along with a lot of surveys that are completed by like the municipality. We see relatively low engagement from the younger age demographic. Just gonna move on to the next slide here. Okay, so in terms of preferred information, so these are the top 5 that we pulled from the survey results. So we have news about the town, information related to council decisions, information about town announcements, service updates, and events and programs. Of course, there were some other preferred types of information as well, but these were the top 5 that would be looking at, I guess, including in the strategy as items that residents really want to receive communication on moving forward. And then in terms of preferred method of communication, overall, yes, print formats were chosen as being a preferred method. However, the top 3 digital formats that the top 3 that were chosen were digital formats, which were e-newsletter, Facebook updates, and town website updates. Similarly to what Matthew just mentioned, and the other surveys where we kind of compared, those were also the 3 top methods of communication that other municipalities are seeing as well as being the top chosen methods amongst their residents. And then just an overview of receiving and distributing the information. So throughout the survey, there were a number of questions where residents were free to put whatever they wanted to, and it was an open comment box. So in terms of additional items that residents would like to receive communication on, they'd like to see things more on recreation, events, programming, new land developments, more on garbage and recycling. And I think one of the things to note there is just more clarity on, things like where they can get their recycling schedules. So just enhance communication on what we already do, environmental related initiatives, and different town projects. And then in terms of just like in general, to improve communication, there's a strong desire from residents who want to receive more email and direct communication from the town. So along with having the options where residents could select what communication methods they prefer, that was also a very common written response from residents when they had a comment box. There's also a desire to have text message communication. And then residents are also looking for, just in general, more consistent communication. They want something that might go to them weekly, bi-monthly, or monthly, which is where something like a newsletter or something might come in. Okay, and then looking at some areas of improvement, again, big focus in a portion of the survey. So, sorry, getting a little bit of feedback here. One of the areas which, we were pleased to see in the survey was residents want to see some focus on some good news stories when we're communicating with them to highlight good things going on in the community. They're also looking for more transparency around decisions of council. So this would be things like, the need for closed session, where tax dollars are being spent, that kind of thing. There's also the desire to have more open feedback options for the community. So by open feedback, they're meaning areas where they can see each other's comments and they can kind of go back and forth with each other. More awareness of special meetings and the outcomes of public consultations such as this. An increase in electronic communication, and an enhanced communication on road closures. Okay, and another question we asked residents was barriers to accessing information, to see if there's any areas where we can improve how we might be able to access more of our residents. So some of the areas were having an easier access to information so residents don't have to go on such a lengthy search, fixing some of the issues on the town's website in terms of the search function on the website, which is hard for residents to navigate sometimes. There are various comments on just a lack of access sometimes when calling and to speak with staff. And again, confusion on just reaching staff by phone and not sure who to contact for the right person. Residents aren't necessarily sure where they can go for updated information, and just a better need to provide better communication to the elderly population and more accessible ways to provide information about the decisions of council. Okay, so next I'm just going to go through quickly in terms of what communication method each age group wanted to receive and through what channel. So under 18, we only had one valid response. I'm just going to lump that together with the next age group because there's only 2 responses in total. So general, you're seeing a mix of communication methods that they are looking to receive. So council decisions, Facebook, again, it's leaning more on the digital side. And then moving over to the 25 to 34 age group, it's where responses start to pick up a bit. So the top preferred communication type would be, the top item they'd like to receive communication on is the council decisions. And then the top method would be Facebook. And then moving on to 35 to 44. So they'd want to receive more information on events and programs. And again, Facebook was the top communications method they would be looking to receive information through. For 45 to 54, again, responses really start to pick up here. It's where we see the residents get more engaged in this age group. They're looking for more information on service updates, and this is where we start to see the e-newsletter come in as the most preferred communication method. So moving on to 55 to 64. This group's looking for more information about the town primarily and e-newsletter. And then for 65 to 74, this was the group that I believe the second most responses from. And they're looking for primarily information on announcements from the town, and again, newsletters as their top method of communication. And then lastly, when we look at the 75 plus age group, they are primarily looking for information on council decisions, and we see a shift from the digital material, and they are looking for printed material rather than digital. And I will pass it over to Matthew.
Thanks. So next steps for us is we're going to take this information. We're going to take the information we've done from the rest of our research. We're going to map out what is a sustainable communication strategy that is able to highlight the information people most want to see. And given the resources we have at play, we're not going to be able to do everything, but we're going to try to choose the top things that we think will have most bang for our buck, if you will. And then in working with other municipal staff, setting up systems where information flow goes into communications, we're able to target a lot of the stuff we're doing. So if it's for the general population, let's say like we were going to do something about elections and we wanted to reach everybody, you would use every single channel. If you were going to target something for seniors, you might use printed material and e-newsletters. If you were looking just to focus on youth, you would go 100% digital. But being able to tailor the information you're putting out and in the way that you're delivering it, we're going to see engagement rates increase. And we'll be able to measure that, particularly with digital. And you're going to see a greater level of awareness. And the other thing I think isn't surprising for me to see is there's very much an expectation in the community, and I've seen it in other communities I've been in, that we can, wherever possible, deliver information into people's social media accounts, inboxes, that sort of thing. The desire for people to look and search, whether it be, there's a bit more willingness on a website, but the requirement for people to try to search out the information they're looking for, they might be willing to do that once by signing up for a newsletter and having it delivered. But the expectation is that they'll be able to tailor their information delivery sources for the vast majority of the population, and that's what we're going to endeavor to do. With that, we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. Thanks, Kylie. Is there any, go ahead, Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor. Matthew, I don't disagree necessarily with surveys. They're interesting to look at, but I wouldn't want to base a lot of decisions just solely on surveys. But it's, and another thing I noticed, the response level is pretty low in the young, and then it goes up as age goes. And then when you hit 75, you don't give a crap anymore. Is that, I don't know. I like your response about letting people know things in different forms of media, because different age groups clearly don't look at things the same way. Like just, they didn't look at this survey the same way. So anyway, just that's all. I just wanted to make that comment.
So I'm happy to speak on that point through you, Mr. Mayor. So I would say that in formulating a plan, we wouldn't base everything on just this survey. Taking a look at all of the information in aggregate, so various surveys across various municipalities, academic studies, Statistics Canada on preferences, that's plus or minus in terms of whether or not it's accurate. When you take a look at all of that in aggregate, there's a number of things that are saying exactly the same thing. So for example, e-newsletters is coming up in every single survey that every single municipality is doing. It is a common denominator, whether you're in Hamilton, whether you're in Edmonton, it's something that's coming up a lot. The differentiation between different age groups and their preference is coming up an awful lot. And it's not dissimilar from different municipalities. And so when you take a look at all of that in aggregate, what it tells me is the information we're getting is not dissimilar to what other people are seeing. So the pattern is the same. And in being able to pull that information and the preferences and the feedback that we heard, it's being able to tailor a plan and let people know this is specifically the approach we're going to take. This is the information we're going to deliver and how we're going to do it. And doing that consistently and constantly, so people understand exactly how it's going to happen and they get used to the pattern of information flow. It necessarily means we won't be able to do everything, but the stuff we're going to do very well.
Thank you. I like that, doing everything very well. That's a good achievement to reach for.
Thanks, Councillor Martin. Is there any other questions or comments? Councillor Hicks.
I'm not going to belabor anything at 10:41 PM because I think we're all getting tired. But I do have a question about the 4.1% that preferred using X. And I actually went looking for that in this report. Is as a social media platform, and I've been hearing and seeing that there's other municipalities that have elected to remove it and they're not using it at all based on what's transpiring south of the border. Is this something that has been discussed at a staff level on whether or not we want to retain that platform? I don't use it myself. I don't know.
Through your worship. So the town actually hasn't been using X for about like over a year. We haven't used that as our main form of communication. We don't have a high following on X. There's not a lot of engagement on X. So despite everything happening across the border, I would say given there's a very low preference for it, it probably won't make the list, but yeah.
And so, and just to follow up on that, on a personal level, I'm not a big fan of the platform. I think it's gone in a very different direction, but these are the kind of decisions we're going to make. So it's, if we're going to allocate staff resources to a specific item, I would rather focus our attention on something we know is going to work for more people, and stuff that is working for a smaller number, while not unimportant. If it's a choice of where you're going to spend your time, it's better to spend your time on stuff that will have a higher impact as opposed to stuff that will have a lower impact. So essentially you're turning up the volume on the stuff that works and you're turning off the stuff that doesn't or doesn't work very much.
Go ahead, Councillor Hicks.
So, thank you, Your Worship. So in the getting the information out there as to where they can actually find the information, it's like it's a vicious circle. And I was thinking about this earlier today, and something that we did, and I know it sounds a little strange, but I'm going to put it out there anyway. For the downtown shopping party, we dropped flyers off at the local pizzerias and asked them to, when your driver takes the pizza up to the door, can you slap one of these on the box? Because maybe somebody didn't know. Is this something like the pharmacies? Because when you're talking about printed material, the library could have the printed material on the desk or somewhere like that. I'm asking if to indicate to people where they can find this, you have to meet them where they are, right? So that age group that's looking for printed material, they're likely using a pharmacy in Napanee, and I guarantee you they're using the county museum and probably the library as well.
So just in response to that, through you, Mr. Mayor, I think regardless of the methods you're choosing, the number one core principle is consistency. So whatever you're going to do it often, do it in the same way, and people will get used to patterns and habits. And if you can tailor it to preferences that are already there, you're going to have a higher degree of success in the beginning. And as people get used to it, and I'll use e-newsletters as an example, when you start delivering e-newsletters, you're going to have a low number of subscribers, and more people that get used to it, you're going to see a pattern. And at one point you're going to see a spike because you're going to hit critical mass. And so rather than trying a lot of different things at different times, I've seen success, and my colleagues have seen success by choosing a strategy that's data informed and research informed, and then implementing it, measuring it, and giving people time to get used to the way that you're doing stuff. And that's when you're going to start to see a greater increase in engagement and, viewership, listenership, readership, that sort of thing. Consistency is the key.
Thanks, Councillor Hicks. Thank Mr. Grant. Is there any other questions, comments, or concerns with respect to the report or the presentation we've heard here this evening? Seeing none, we do have a staff recommendation that council receive for information the reports of the community consultation on communications preferences. Moved by Councillor Hick, seconded by Councillor Martin. If there's no further comments, questions, or concerns, all in favor of that motion? Opposed? Motion is carried. Question for Madam Clerk, or maybe Mr. Grant. The next matter, Executive Service Arts and Culture Awards. Is this time sensitive?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think that the matter itself and being executed is not time sensitive. The group that's interested in knowing whether or not council endorses this is rather timely. If this were to wait until the chair of the Arts Committee were to return, I would think that would not be untoward.
You must be reading my mind, Mr. Grant. It's now past quarter to 11 or quarter to 10 or quarter to 11. And I got lucky once in passing a motion to go past 10 o'clock. I don't think I'll be so lucky to pass a motion to go past 11. So I think what we'd like to do, Madam Clerk, if we could, is put number 10.9 Executive Services Arts and Culture Awards on the next agenda as unfinished business, and we'll deal with it in a couple of weeks.
Through your worship, we can do that. And just to confirm, that committee's not scheduled to meet again until April, so we should be okay for timing.
It's all coming together. Thanks, Jess. Having done that, we'll move into bylaws. Bylaw, we do have a bylaw number 2025-0021 to appoint a fire chief. Look for a motion to put it on the floor. Moved by Deputy Mayor Calver, second by Councillor Martin. Ready first, second, and finally passed. It's 11th day of March, 2025. All in favor of the motion? Opposed? Motion's carried. Congratulations, Chief Armstrong, and welcome. Next matter, information reports from members. Do any members of council have any information reports with respect to any committees or anything that they're involved in right now? Seeing none. Inquiries. Do any members of council have any inquiries of staff that they would like to task them with to bring back at a future council meeting? Seeing none. Notices of motion. I don't believe we have any notices of motion, but we'll ask the question to see if there's any out there. Seeing none. New business. Do we have any new business that anyone would like to introduce? Seeing none. Announcements. Are there any announcements that anyone would like to make this evening? Seeing none. CAO's remarks. Mr. Grant, is there anything you would like to enlighten us with at this late hour?
Only that I'm not intending to bring us anywhere near 11 o'clock, so no.
I was wondering whether you're going to take the challenge or not. The forward calendar, we do have had an opportunity to look at the 2025 quarter one forward calendar as well as the 2025 council resolution trackers. Anything in those two documents anyone has any questions of or would like to make comment of? Seeing none, we'll look for a motion to confirm the proceedings for a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council Corporation of Town of Greater Napanee. Moved by Councillor Hick, seconded by Councillor Martin. Ready first, second, and finally passed this 11th day of March, 2025. All in favor of the motion? Opposed? Motion is carried. And we'll look for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Deputy Mayor Calver, seconded by Councillor Martin. Quite aggressively. All in favor of the motion? Opposed, motion is carried. Thanks, folks, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.